Good morning, everyone. This is the Wednesday, January 8th, 2020. Nags Head Board of Commissioners meeting is called to order. If you'll please join me first in a few moments of silence. And now, as you're able, if you will please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item would be the adoption of our agenda, and a motion would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda are recognitions.
Good morning, Mayor, and Happy New Year. First off, we'd like to recognize our principal planner, Holly White, for 5 years of service, and Michael Zanner, the planning director, will conduct that recognition.
Good morning. I'm happy to come before you today to recognize Holly White, Principal Planner, for her 5 years of service to the town. Holly came to the town 5 years ago from Currituck County, prior to that with the town of Kitty Hawk, and she's a graduate of ECU and a native of Bertie County, North Carolina, so a native Northeast North Carolinian. I think there's a few things, and Holly made me promise that I wouldn't keep her up here long, but there's a few things that are apparent about Holly that I've come to learn in the last 11 months that I've worked with her that make her an asset to the town. She's dedicated, she appreciates a challenge, and she's caring. I think, you know, it's the immense responsibility that she took on in the 5 years that she's been here, the comp plan and the UDO, I think are a huge professional accomplishment that we shouldn't diminish. She's passionate for resiliency, and I think that's something that raises the profile of the town, makes the town relevant in matters of resiliency throughout the state. And Holly's been recognized for that work and her professionalism there. And she's caring about the town, about the residents, but also about her coworkers. And I think that's what makes Holly such an asset to the town, and we appreciate her work. And thank you for 5 years.
Congratulations. Good to see you. Yes. Thank you.
Next, I ask the fire chief to come up for a special heroic recognition for one of our lifeguards from Save This Summer.
Good morning, Mayor Cahoon and distinguished commissioners. As a fire chief, one of the great joys and sources of pride is to see young men and women associated with your organization do some truly heroic acts. Then find a way to recognize the valor that they've demonstrated. We have a unique and talented team of ocean rescue lifeguards. These men and women serve our community and visitors as watchful protectors, helping hands. And often these men and women are the only representatives of the town a visitor directly interacts with, leaving a lasting impression on them. It's my pleasure to introduce Captain Chad Motz to report the actions of lifeguard Austin Fallon.
Austin, come on up here. All right. I'm going to preface this presentation just a little bit and talk about our organization. Nags Head Ocean Rescue has a reputation of being one of the most rigorous and challenging training programs, you know, in the Outer Banks and around the country. And you know, part of my personal philosophy is to take these individuals and challenge them to find their comfort zone and then push outside that comfort zone. For the situation that they may come across during their work during the summer, whether it's, you know, Memorial Day to Labor Day or after Labor Day in the evenings when they're on call. We send lifeguards out to competitions and bring home trophies and win those competitions, which is just an easy reflection of the hard work that they put in, both the required training they do and all the work and training they do, you know, on their own time. Austin Fallon, the guy we're giving an award to this morning, just eats that up. I mean, he loves the training part, the physical challenges of it. And, you know, a challenge for me is taking a guy like him and finding his limits and challenging him. But he loves it. He's in love with the job. And so this makes, you know, this really easy to do. But we had, you know, a challenging fall this fall, and there's some pictures coming across the screen, and you know, the photographer's in the right place at the right time on this rescue. And there's lots of rescues that we performed this fall, but this one, you know, was above and beyond for sure. This day we had Hurricane Humberto off the coast, and Austin responded to this call at Jeanette's Fishing Pier and swam out on the south side of the pier. Encountered this individual. He had a boogie board originally. The boogie board, he got hit by a wave. That boogie board was ripped from him. Austin was able to make contact with the victim, secure him. And at that point, tried to swim in on the south side of the pier. He was fighting a rip current on the south side. You know, with his training and ocean awareness, realized that he was just going nowhere. He was fighting the lateral current and the rip current. So he evaluated the situation and took the individual and swam him through the pier to the north side using the lateral current, and then was able to get him back to the beach. And at the end, there's a couple surfers in the water that came out to give him some assistance. And when it was all said and done, and his supervisor, Andy Simerson, you know, wrote me an email and saying, you know, we need to recognize this effort in some way. And at the end of it, he said, I've never seen Austin tired after a workout, after a training session. But after this rescue, I saw Austin, he had that look of tiredness. And so it was a challenge for him, which says a lot. So today, we're going to present Austin with this life-saving certificate here. This life-saving award is presented to Austin Fallon for his heroic rescue performed on the afternoon of September 20th, 2019. Hurricane Humberto sending swells of 8 to 10 feet barreling towards the North Carolina coast. Red no swimming flags flying along the beaches, and the victim's location being underneath Jeanette's Pier amongst the concrete pilings about 100 yards out. This was not your average ocean rescue. Without lifeguard Fallon's quick recognition and response through the dangerous surf conditions, this incident would most certainly have had a negative outcome. This award is presented on this day, 8th of January, 2020. Congratulations, Austin.
I want to let the, thank you. Wonderful job. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your service.
That's awesome. I want to let the board know we've asked Austin to stay around until after the next presentation, and we'll get a photograph with Austin in recognition of this tremendous achievement and our great appreciation for Kim and our entire lifeguard service. Cliff?
Yes, sir. Speaking of heroes, we have recognition of retirement for Lisa Ward. Deputy Chief Perry Hale will make this recognition.
Come on, Lisa. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners.
Morning.
First of all, congratulations, Austin, on your hard work on that day. Mayor, Commissioners, it's employees like this that we have here at the town that set us above and beyond other municipalities here on this Outer Banks. I'm a firm believer of that. Lisa, excuse me, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, if I don't get through this. I've worked with Lisa for 10 years. This is bittersweet. The sweetness is on her side, I guess, that she is retiring after 28 years, excuse me, with the town of Nags Head. As I said, I've worked with her for 10 years, and the last 5 years while she was here, it was a tight-knit working relationship as I moved up the ladder here in the police department, as Lisa was the office manager, IT person for the, IT director for the police department itself. It's going to be hard to not have her here. We had our own little tight group up front between, as former retired Chief Brinkley, now Commissioner Brinkley, as well as office manager now. Ms. D. Johnson can attest to that we'd have our differences, but we also always came together at the end of them to put the police department in the town first. And the dedication, passion, and professionalism that Lisa exhibited each and every day was above and beyond. If we had all employees exhibit that type of behavior, the town of Nags Head, even though we do shine, it would make us shine even better. Lisa has been here. She started in 1992, and she's going to hear me say it again that I was a sophomore in high school when she started here. We've always joked and got along. I will tell some funny stories. Lisa thought it was kind of strange at first when I moved up to the West Wing, as we call it, up front in administration part of the police department. But when it snowed, I said we ought to do ice cream cakes. And she just kind of looked at me, well, it's cold outside, why are we doing ice cream? And it was just something that we had, and it started ever since then. We had an official snow measuring device that was a 12-inch ruler that we'd go to the event site, being that there was no obstacles that could drift sand up and get a true measurement, and if it was over a certain inches, we'd have ice cream cake. So those things like that we're going to miss. The technical side, Lisa, that you put forth each and every day, the amount of information and knowledge that you passed on to me. I know I shared some knowledge with some in-car cameras and stuff when I came here, but what you have taught me on the back side of it with the IT portion of it has definitely made me, hopefully made me a lot better with the communication aspect and getting those systems set up. Lisa started out with the cameras in our vehicles. As we all know, law enforcement has cameras in the vehicles now, and body cameras. She started out when we had VHS tapes in the trunks. Some of our new employees, they don't really know what VHS tapes are, but we'd have to change them out. She set that program up, and just recently, even while she was in her final weeks of retirement, when we know most people that see that light and getting ready to walk through that retirement door slow down and don't put in the effort. She was here past 5 o'clock, past 7 o'clock. On the weekends, I'm getting emails telling me what she has done to get the system in place so we can get these body cameras deployed. That's dedication and passion that you don't see in each and every employee, but Lisa has done this and carried that drive out each and every day while she's here. I told her this morning that we had a 5-minute PowerPoint, a couple clips, because Lisa doesn't like the attention brought onto herself, but this is well deserved. I was joking with her, of course. You should have seen her eyes when I told her that. But Lisa, congratulations. You're missed each and every day. I hope you still come by and see us. But the work that you've put in, it truly shows how dedicated you were to this police department and to the town of Nags Head, and you're going to be missed, and congratulations on your 28 years of retirement. And I have to say, her husband David is here. We appreciate you giving us Lisa each and every day. I know the phone would ring and she'd be saying it was David. It's not David, it's David. That they would have lunch, dinner plans, etc., and she'd still be at the office working. We appreciate it. We hope y'all enjoy the new chapter of your life, and y'all have fun, and please stop by and see us. Mr. Manager?
Just real briefly, I don't want to delay your applause, but I did want to say, when Lisa was, when you're able and ready to retire, and she could have retired earlier, and I came to her, we were going through a transition with our IT department, and I needed somebody that could help us, could help the staff, could help all of us do that transition, and Lisa was more than qualified to do that, and she stepped right into that role, and worked just equally as hard as the deputy chief said in those 6 months past her planned retirement. And I just want to say, on behalf of all of us, how much we appreciate and thank you for making that transition and that commitment to the town when you could have just said, nope, I'm out. So thank you for that. So now.
And I'd like to invite the board to come around and get a picture with Lisa. Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Lisa, you can always come back. Thank you.
Often when we recognize these great employees, the room is not as full as this. And I understand why the room is full this morning, but I'm glad that you're here to see the kind of wonderful employees that this town has that make our job relatively easy and pleasant. And we really do appreciate them. The next item on our agenda is public comment. I do want to highlight, before I turn it over to Mr. Leidy, that if you are here to speak about the Coastal Villas preliminary plat, this is the time, this public comment time is the time to speak. There will not be a public comment period later in the meeting during the consideration of that. There will be questions from the board and discussion, but not an open comment period. So now is the time to speak, and I'll turn this over to Mr. Leidy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, the board welcomes members of the public to provide public comment to the board. This is an opportunity for people to express concerns or views to the board as a whole. It is not an opportunity for dialogue. The board rarely responds to public comments, but if you would, please, anybody who's interested, please approach the podium, tell us who you are, and then address your remarks to the board as a whole. And as the mayor indicated, if you are here to talk about the one public hearing that we have scheduled for today, which involves a text amendment regarding off-street parking, if you can wait until we get to that item. But if you're here with interest on any other matter on the agenda, this would be the time to provide those comments. So with that, anybody who wishes to comment to the board, if you'll please go to the podium and tell us who you are. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Jim Troutman. I'm a resident of South Ridge. In fact, I live on Drifting Sands Court at the end of the cul-de-sac. I want to start out saying I do not have a problem with the new subdivision as such. As y'all know, it will help our tax base just a little bit, right, Mr. Mayor? Mm-hmm. But I do have a problem with the access that is planned for that subdivision. As proposed, the access would be for the people who are trying to get to their one of 17 houses to turn on Deering Street. Go down Deering Street until you get to Van Sciver. Make a 90-degree right-hand turn. Go to the end of Van Sciver and get to Ridgeway, make another 90-degree right-hand turn. And then go down to Seabass Court, stop again, make another right-hand turn, then go a little ways and make a left-hand turn on a proposed street called Mariner's Way, and then make another turn to go to your house, either left or right. It's going to be in the new neighborhood. 6 turns. My concern is for safety in our emergency vehicles. If my house was burning in this new neighborhood, and I had to wait for a fire truck to make 6 turns, and they're sharp turns, in which we have to slow down to make with that large truck, and also a rescue squad, and the police department to try to get there, it just doesn't make sense when this neighborhood is adjacent to Highway 158. And the access directly off 158 would be so much simpler and easier and safer for those residents in that new neighborhood. Also, by living on Drifting Sands Court, when we pull out to Deering Street, and this is specifically really during the summertime when we have a whole lot more people, and people that rent houses back there, we have an issue with people speeding down down Deering. We have a hill, if you've ever noticed it, when you turn into Deering, that hill comes up, and the peak of that hill is just about opposite where the old sales office used to be for Southridge. When we pull out of Drifting Sands, we have to be very careful that somebody's not coming over that hill. Now, I drive a 4-wheel drive pickup, so my sight advantage is higher than most people in a regular vehicle. And so I'll tell you what, I've had some tests several times with people popping over that hill when I pull out. Somebody in a regular automobile is much lower, and their sight advantage is much lower and harder to see somebody coming. It's a wonder we haven't already had an accident right there with somebody getting T-boned right in the driver's seat. Now, with all that being said, yesterday, I walked the distance from Soundside Road to Deering Street with a wheel counter. I wanted to see exactly how much distance do we have from those 2 roads. The distance that I measured was 2,016 feet. And I walked it twice just to make sure that I was correct. As you all know, half a mile is 2,640 feet. I said, well, let's compare this to some other accesses off of 158. So I went up to Bonnet Street where the YMCA is. I walked from Bonnet Street to where the Pirates Quay shops are, using the same measurement, 520 feet. Then the distance from Pirates Quay shops to Wood Hill Drive, 278 feet. And then the distance from Wood Hill Drive to Villa Dunes Drive, 209 feet. You total that together, that's 1,007 feet, and you have 4 accesses to Highway 158. 4. We got 2,016 feet from Soundside Road to Deering, 1 access, and over twice the distance.
Mr. Troutman, if you could please wrap up in 15 seconds.
Yes, sir. I'm asking you guys today, when you get to item H, this item is to just take that in consideration when you start reviewing the plat for this new subdivision. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
Well, good morning. It's my first time here. I'm Teresa Cassidy. I'm also a resident of Southridge. And I had sent an email last week, so I'll just cover those few points at the very beginning. Living in Southridge, if you, browse out, I guess, at any time of the day, Deering Street is a very busy street, and it's not an easy street to walk on, to ride your bike on, to jog on, or as I included in my email, even to spend time talking with our neighbors as we meet either at the corners or the other crossroads. This time of the year, school year, our buses are traveling through there to collect our children, twice a day at least, and often the buses do have to make alternate turns. They sometimes come down drifting sands to turn in the cul-de-sac to go back out. So that safety of our children and ourselves is very important to us in Southridge. I think Jim mentioned the speeding on Deering. It's very, it's not often, I guess, that you find someone traveling at 25 miles an hour, which is the posted speed limit. And then the last point I made at the beginning of the email was that there's no curbs, sidewalks, or even clear paths for us to get off the road when cars are approaching. When heavy rains come, some of those intersections and sides of the roads are already flooded, so there's no easy way to get off of those roads with additional traffic. We are, as Jim mentioned too, we're certainly not against the development. We just don't need that traffic coming through Southridge, and we also are in agreement that access should be built off of 158. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, Dominic Powell. I live at Ridgeview Way, where they're talking about. Same thing, we're not against the houses being built. There's only one place in the whole United States that red wolves live, and that's Dare County. People probably don't know that. And there's a den back there where that road's gonna go right through, and I called the Wildlife Federation, the Red Wolf Coalition of Columbia. Nobody's aware of this. Let's just make sure all that's taken care of if you guys do go through that area. Plus other wildlife, deer, rabbit. It helps keep rodents down, snakes. There was a rat problem for like 2 weeks that we had around our houses. It's gone, thanks to them. We don't have no deer ticks because they take care of the old deers that can't take care of themselves. Just stuff like that. Nobody probably looked at that area. It's a wildlife refuge. There's tons of stuff there. They could come off the main highway like the other houses do on the other side, where they just built that 6 giant place where you can have weddings and everything. The house is a little bit farther down that are all for sale, not to add. Right next to the church, they have the road access. And if it's a safety problem, then how were they built? So we understand that the houses can be built. We all have houses built. But why go through where we live to get to where we live? I didn't have to go through your neighborhood to get to my house. They wouldn't allow that, so just something. And there's animals there. So let's think of that first. This is why we live in Nags Head. We just told 2 great stories of why we moved here. It's not that we're against the houses. Let's just do it the right way. Let's just not do it in December and January when half the people are on vacation. Nothing's open. Let's calm down. He can have the houses built. I think he's building the houses down the end of Ridgeview already. They've gotten rid of the coyote population. The police were there in the summer to take care of some of it. They were around the neighborhood. Somebody's dog, the guy actually moved because he was tired of it. He moved away, I think to Maine or Maryland. So he's having houses built. We're not against that. Let's just make sure we're doing the right thing first for the animals that were here before us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Mayor Calhoun and the commissioners. This is my first time here, and my topic is a little bit different. My name is Debra Horst, and I'm a resident of Nags Head. About 6 months ago, we had an issue at our house with our mentally ill with my mentally ill stepdaughter. The police were called because she was getting physical with my husband and myself, at which time my husband told me to go upstairs and call the police. I called the police and was telling them what was happening. They asked me if it was physical, and I said yes, it was. As soon as the first police car showed up, the dispatcher got off the line, and at which time I saw the police officer get out of his car and was waving his gun. I ran downstairs as fast as I could, at which point he'd said that he'd saw my husband dragging her out of the car. But she was never in the car. She was banging on the window and the door of her boyfriend's car. He was in the car. She'd also kicked the front door in on her way out, which I had found out later on. We then went down to the police station to hear the 911 call that I made and to review the videos. When we received the videos at our attorney's office, there were supposed to be 3 videos, of which we only got 2. They cannot be played on other DVD players, and the one that we really wanted from the initial officer that showed up, that was the video that we wanted to see. It looks like it's been compromised because usually when a call goes out and they're on their way to your home, you see them get in the car, they turn the camera and the video on, the sound on, you see them, which turns they take to get to your house. But there is absolutely no volume on that video, and that was the main video that we wanted to see. We had spoke to the police chief prior to getting an attorney, and he had told us that an investigation would have been done because it ended up being my husband who was arrested, not my stepdaughter. I had asked why my stepdaughter wasn't arrested, and I didn't get an answer. My husband was arrested, and this is why I wanted the videos. When they did the investigation, I asked them if you could let us know when it's done, but they did an internal investigation after I was told a full investigation would have been done. A full investigation would have meant that they would have called at least myself and my husband, because it was our home that they came to, but I was never questioned by the chief of police on what happened during that internal investigation against the police officer who was waving his gun when he got out of his car and ended up arresting my husband. I don't know what to do at this point. That's why I came to the meeting. I am looking for answers, and I know this is not a back and forth, but I just wanted to express, what happened that day, because we do have an attorney right now, and I can't seem to get any real answers. I can't get a copy of the internal investigation that was done against the police officer. I can't get answers, and I can't seem to get the one video that we really needed, even though the judge said we need that video preserved, so that means it hasn't been touched. But it obviously has, because there's no sound. And the only other thing I wanted to bring up was when they did come over to our home, 3 police cars showed up, numerous police officers. And out of my home was my husband, myself, my stepdaughter, and her boyfriend. When the police officers came, by the time I got downstairs, it was absolute chaos. And I remember standing there, and I was thinking to myself, why is this happening like this? Everybody was in talking and shouting distance of each other. It was honestly chaos. And I remember thinking to myself, why aren't they separating everybody? At least this way, it gives everybody a chance to calm down and for them to talk to somebody. But every time a police officer was talking to one of us, somebody else was there, whether it's another police officer or somebody from my home, and it just never seemed to stay calm. So that's really why I'm here. And like I said, I know you can't give us any answers, but I thought maybe if I come to the next town meeting after you've heard what I had to say, maybe I could get a little bit of help on getting those videos with the sound, any videos that haven't been compromised. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning. My name's Richard Kittrell, and I too live in Southridge and live on Seabass Court. I spoke briefly at the planning board meeting in December. First of all, I want to say Happy New Year to all of you all. And also I want to thank you all for serving in the positions that you're in. Also want to thank you for letting us voice our concerns regarding coastal villas. I'm speaking today because really of 2 issues that impact the existing Southridge development. That would be stormwater runoff and also the increased traffic that can really pose significant safety hazards to pedestrians. On a positive note, though, I like the other 2 people that spoke, I have no problem with the subdivision. I am thankful that they're half-acre lots and not the 1/3 or 1/4 acre lots that are built on often here in the Outer Banks. I still believe that the residents and the developer can come to an amenable agreement by allowing coastal villas to be a standalone development. First of all, by having ingress and egress directly off of 158 and not using or utilizing Mariner's Way onto Seabass Court. In other words, sealing that area on the west side of the new subdivision. This would allow the developer to have the same number of lots as proposed. And this could be accomplished by moving the what was the proposed road in the April 8th, 2019 submission that was very close to Nags Head Church. Moving it further south, as this gentleman had talked about, since he did the specifics with the measurements and all, but that road can be moved further south towards the post office, and I believe not pose any kind of safety threat as far as traffic is concerned. Even the fire department has expressed, you know, ideally they'd like to have direct access off the bypass and not have to go through the neighborhood to answer any calls. That same thing would go for police. Further, to me, it doesn't pass the common sense test to route all that traffic through the existing Southridge neighborhood to get to this new subdivision. It's about 3/4 of a mile, and this gentleman has talked about the number of turns just to get back there to the new subdivision. Daring Street, that's the point of access into this whole area that we're talking about, is one of the busiest intersections in Nags Head, and maybe one of the most dangerous. It's, as you know, the post office is there. I've talked to Gene Garrison, the postmaster. He said they service more than 200 people a day at that location, and that probably doesn't even count the people that go there and only go to the post office boxes and all. And in the summertime, that vehicular traffic increases. I mean, it's multiplied greatly. On Sundays, both Grace Lutheran and Nags Head Church use Deering as an outlet. As you know, Soundside Drive does not have a stoplight. A lot of people from, say, Nags Head Church are fearful to take a left turn off Soundside Drive to get onto the bypass, because it is somewhat dangerous with all the traffic, especially in the summertime. I would also like to remind everybody that there's a new road just south of here that was recently installed and approved by the commissioners onto the bypass, which was merely a paper road a few months ago. And that's what I guess we call the wedding venue with the convention center. But that road has access onto Route 12 as well, and potentially that road could carry more traffic than what we're talking about over at Coastal Villas. So therefore, as far as safety concerns, they should have been given the same attention at that location. The other issue is stormwater runoff. It's already been stated that by Michael Zahner that the elevation of the proposed subdivision will be the same as that of the bypass road. In other words, in many areas, because of the topography, it's going to be raised. The existing topography in that area is certainly, the residents know, it's a natural decline towards the sound side.
Mr. Kittrell, if you could please finish in 15 seconds.
So I'm concerned about stormwater runoff. I'm concerned about the infiltration basins being flattened over time because of lack of vegetation and maintenance and that type of thing. One gentleman already addressed the issue about the timing of this meeting over the holidays when people are not really paying attention. So in closing, I'd like to ask the commissioners and Mr. Mayor to consider tabling this until we, the residents, the planners, and the developer can meet together to have a meaningful discussion to see if we can come to an agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Kittrell.
Thank you.
Mayor, Commissioners, my name is David Kravitz. I live at 400 West Cobb's Way in Southridge, and I've already sent you an email in regard to my concerns, which has actually already been discussed here. I am going to throw something at you which is just slightly different. It's called unintended consequences. And this unintended consequences was actually already seen last month when Soundside Drive, unfortunately, was closed for about 4 days, I guess it was, under a rush rebuild when the pipes underneath collapsed. We had that traffic, and I also have 2 friends who live there who would have to go the longer access around Soundside Drive and then Deering Street all the way up through the light. In consideration, this might sound really strange, but it almost seems like there should be 2 accesses to the new development. Primarily off of 158, because it's already been known that that is the fastest way to get any type of an emergency vehicle in and out. But if indeed that road is blocked, they don't have any other way to get out. So this is something that probably planning should consider because it is purely a safety factor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning. My name's Paul Melnick. I am located on Seabass Court. I did send some of the commissioners and the mayor a picture of my property when we get significant rain. And my property and the property next door and some of the other properties have significant ponding when we get heavy rains, and that happens several times a year. My concern is that the Costa Villas development is going to be about 2 feet higher at least than the properties on Seabass Court. And I understand from the plan that there's going to be basins built, and they're going to be built so that they can handle a 1.5-inch design storm. But we get 4, 5, 6 inches of rain several times a year. And it may be one day by a coastal storm, or it could be over several days by thunderstorms. But it does happen several times a year. There's an ordinance that was sent to me. It's Unified Development Ordinance 11.6.2 that says a subdivision must have a system designed to accommodate the runoff generated by a 1.5-inch design storm. And that's what the basins are being built to for the Coastal Villas development. The ordinance also says, even more importantly, that overflow shall not be conveyed off-site to private property or public rights-of-way for disposal except upon the establishment of appropriate easements and maintenance agreements among all impacted parties and upon town approval. So my concern is that we already get ponding, and I've had ponding on my property that lasted up to a month. And I did send pictures, I don't know if you saw them, but my concern is that the water, when we get these big storms, it's going to overflow. There's no doubt about it. It's going to overflow from these basins. And I'd like to ask the commissioners to make sure that before they approve this plan, that none of that water, even if we get the bigger storms, flows into the Seabass development, because my property and some of the other properties can't handle it anymore. It's almost topping our septic systems when it happens. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melnick.
Good morning. Rachel Baker. I also live over on Ridgeview Way. My husband and I moved to Nags Head in 2015 with the plan of this being our forever home, a place to raise our son in a strong community known for helping its neighbors and a wonderful school system. When we planned our 3,000-mile move from Tacoma, Washington, we made a point of talking to locals and really getting to know the area. This is how we found the Southridge community. It is the perfect fit for us, a nice, quiet neighborhood with mostly year-round neighbors. I feel safe being outside with my 4-year-old son, a neighborhood I enjoy taking my morning runs in. It's quite a change from the West Coast. There have been 5 new homes built on our street alone since we moved in. This is expected. Everyone wants to live in paradise, right? But these are also year-round residents who, like us, love our quiet neighborhood and respect one another. With the proposed new addition of 17 homes, you are in essence destroying everything that we love about Southridge. With the houses this size, you are most likely going to be summer rentals. Most locals do not purchase 4 to 5 bedroom homes. Summer rentals can bring excessive drinking, loud yelling, fireworks, and the biggest issue of all, unsafe driving. Locals have learned that come summertime, we are all just trying to survive and get through. We have rentals already in our neighborhood and see this change as the summer months come. But we also chose a section of the beach that has less rentals. We chose a neighborhood and a community. Seabass is directly across from my home. This proposal has the entrance of these 17 houses off of Seabass, which would greatly increase the traffic and the chances of accidents by drunk drivers. If someone under the influence misses the Seabass stop sign and drives right through, they will end up in my front yard where my small child and I often play. Please consider what you are doing to the year-round residents if you add these houses. You are going against everything that makes us neighbors love Southridge. No one is saying not to build, but please choose another entrance. Please let me feel safe playing outside with my child, and please let me hang on to everything that I love about Southridge, Nags Head, and this wonderful neighborhood we call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baker.
Good morning. I'm Tom Cassidy. I live in Southridge. My main concern is the future of building. I know you're going to build these houses. There's no doubt about it. I think you can put a turning lane in like they have at Jockey's Ridge and like you have at Northridge. You put a turning lane in and come off of 158. Because I was talking to a contractor who's building near the other church. He said he owns the land next to Nags Head Church, and they're thinking about putting 20 more houses in there next to this other one. So you're looking at a lot of future building going on. You have a lot of cars coming in off of 158. You should put it off of 158. At least you can put a turn lane in and get people off the highway before they have to turn. Deering's like a raceway during the summer. People are going back to that beach, back by Jockey's Ridge. They're doing like 50 miles an hour. I've been down there walking my dog, almost got hit a couple of times. So you got to look at the future of building too. I mean, I know these houses are going in, but let's do it the right way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy.
Good morning. My name is Mark Egan. I'm a resident of Southridge, live back on Ridgeview Way. Like others have talked about, we chose Southridge to build our retirement home because it was a quiet community, very serene, good neighbors, quiet streets, and we were pretty convenient to everything. Now, if they allow this development to occur, our streets are going to be changed drastically. The impacts are just safety for our kids, grandkids. A lot of people have dogs and they walk their dogs up and down these roads. Now you're going to have a lot more traffic coming in here. From what I saw at the planning meeting that I went to, and I noticed that they conveniently didn't put up the original drawings of what this site was supposed to look like with the access off 158. We need you all to look at that drawing. I sent it to the commissioners in an email. I hope everybody saw what I put in there. The original plan was off of 158. And the intersection of 158 and Deering is, like everybody said, very dangerous area. I know many times you're slowing down to turn right and people are running behind you 60, 65 miles an hour. They don't stop. They swerve around you, blow your horn. If nothing else, they need a right turn lane, just like they do at Northridge, where you got a de-acceleration route. Come on up to there. And with the post office and all the extra traffic, it's just a crazy place. And now you're going to add more traffic, not to mention all the construction equipment. You got heavy equipment going to be coming in there on tractor trailers. You got all the building materials got to be delivered, and they're trying to maneuver these streets. And this, who knows how long this building could go on? It could go on for years. Not just, we're not talking about just a few months, we're talking about years of people coming in and out of here doing this. And then we get on to the runoff, just like the last gentleman just talked about the runoff. Our front yard, we have a ditch and we have swales. Well, I don't know what people think about a swale. Swales fill up with water, it overflows into the neighbor's yard, so I'm not sure what good they were. and they fill in. So who's gonna be responsible for all these ditches and all these swales once the builder is done and moved on? Is the town gonna take care of that? Are they gonna fix them? Because the homeowners, he said, I think in the last meeting, they were gonna have something in the deed for the homeowners to take care of that. Well, homeowners aren't equipped to have backhoes and front end loaders to move dirt around to rebuild these swales, or rebuild these ditches and clean them out. Who's gonna clean them out? So where's this water gonna end up? It's all gonna end up back there on Ridgeview Way, where we're already underwater, and it doesn't take but a heavy thunderstorm. What about if we get a real hurricane and we get 10 inches of rain? Where's all that water coming? It's coming our way, and we just can't handle that. So my hope is that the board will review all these materials and closely review the original plan site, because it looked like a good plan, except for what I noticed was there's one less house, one less lot. There was 16 lots on the original plan that I saw, and I think the new plan has 17. Is it worth that to us? No. So with that, I hope you just review the plans closely so that we can continue to enjoy our quiet neighborhood and do so in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Deegan.
Good morning. My name is Karen Novello. I also live on Ridgeview Way, and I have already sent an email, and I'm just going to kind of briefly read through that. My ancestors have called Dare County their home since the 1700s. I'm a descendant of Thomas Hardy Baum, a lighthouse keeper of Hatteras Light, and Wayland W. Baum is my grandfather. My mother is 93. She continues to reside in Wanchese. My father was in the Army for over 30 years, and once retired, he and my mother built on Baumtown Road, where my mother continues to live today. My father passed in 2011. As a military brat, we traveled and lived abroad. My dreams were always, always to return to the Outer Banks. I was very upset that my cousins, when I was a teenager, got to stay here at the Outer Banks and be waiters and waitresses and earn money, and I had to go to Germany. So now that I look back, great experience, wouldn't trade it for the world, but I was not happy as a teenager. 2 years ago, my husband and I decided to build our forever home on a nice lot we purchased on Ridgeview Way in Southridge. It was time for me to come home. We chose Southridge, particularly Ridgeview Way, because it was well established, mostly permanent residential, and traffic flow was light. It's a quiet, well-maintained, wonderful neighborhood. We have small grandchildren who visit often and 2 dogs who we like to walk throughout our neighborhood, and we love where we live. This is definitely our forever home. But we feel like that our dream of our forever home will be no more if Nags Head builders are allowed to access the road directly into Southridge off of Deering. Makes no sense to me, logically, just common sense, why they would not just have the straight access off of Highway 158. This was the original plan, and for many reasons, I feel like it should remain so. When we bought our lot some years ago, we were told that there would be no further building in Southridge beyond what currently existed. We're asking that you please don't allow 12 to 15 more years of construction equipment, 35 to 50 more vehicles through the neighborhood, and again, it seems logical to me to go ahead and make that access for this new development right directly off Highway 15. It also seems to me that there are many more arguments for access directly off 158 than there are for access winding through our already established neighborhood. There are safety issues abound, as we are a neighborhood of walking homeowners, walking dogs, walking our children and our grandchildren. Emergency vehicles needing access to the additional 17 homes will have to wind their way through our narrow roads to access their homes. Direct access from Highway 158 sounds so much more reasonable, safer, and will mean less response time for families in need. The intersection at Deering and Highway 158 is a dangerous intersection even now. Adding additional traffic in and out will only make it more dangerous. I cannot count the number of times individuals simply ignore the red light there and blow through the intersection long after the light has turned red. It's as if the intersection does not exist. There's also a great deal of traffic in and out of the post office, which is directly right off of, as soon as you turn right, the post office parking lot is right there. The traffic at times is slowing there and lined up to enter the post office parking lot just onto Deering to the right. Allowing the builder access from Deering will only mean more danger and more congestion. There's no slow down lane off of Highway 158 at Deering. This is something our development actually could probably benefit from. And we're all asking you today to please do the right thing and create a direct access to these new 17 homes right off of 158 and not through our well-established community. Many permanent residents have lived here for close to 20 years. And I think we just feel that the original plan is probably a better option. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, Commissioners, Mayor. Joe Ione. I live in Southridge. Recently moved there. I was in Northridge for over 20 years. When I came here in '94, I made friends with Commissioner Romali, Doug, good friend, and through him I made an association with Sonny Cobb, who was the developer at that time for Southridge, and we had a very good association until we lost Sonny. But anyway, basically, he showed me the plan at that time for that section of this 9 acres plus, that it was originally it was supposed to be a commercial property, and that's why it was never built on residential. And at some point, he was going through the commissioners to try and get that changed to an R2, a dual purpose, so that potentially they could, and that's exactly what happened. And when I came here and I built my restaurant where La Fogata is now, that was potentially the property behind that. One of the reasons I built there was that that was supposed to be a hotel area. And as you can see, Eddie Goodrich, there's houses there now. So that's what happens to commercial property when it can't be developed. But anyway, it seems like the main issue is the access. Now, when I lived in Northridge, we didn't have a decel lane until they did the sidewalks through there, and then they put that decel lane in. Now, there's like 130 houses there. There's no traffic light there, so it's not an issue getting in and out of there. If you're putting 17, 18 houses over here on the bypass, putting access off of the bypass is not going to create a big problem. And basically, when I had my business, I was coming to the town to try and get access on the bypass because of my limited access where I was, and basically dealing with DOT. They had no problem with having access on the bypass because that's really their road. It just happens to go through the town, and obviously you have to get permission from the town to go onto the bypass. And eventually I got the access on the bypass, and it was always a public safety issue. And it was, thank God, it's been there for almost 18 years, I guess, and there's never, not to my knowledge, never been a problem with that. So my thing is that having this access to this 9-acre, 10-acre plot that I saw originally through Sonny Cobb, it doesn't seem, the reason being is that that property, to have that access on Mariner's Way, it's there, it exists. Comes down to dollars and cents. It's going to cost them more money to put in access on the bypass with a decel lane than it is to put a paved property that they already own. Now, the thing is, like somebody said, unintended consequences. When I first came here in '94, Andy Ammons and Renee will attest to that, and so will Webb. I got a lot of the ill will because I got in at the end when he was getting ready to leave the town, and because they were supposed to have a dedicated area for a convention center or whatever, and they never built that. So anyway, the unintended consequences are the fact that the property over here, there should be access from the bypass, 18 more cars going that way versus coming up Deering, which is and then with the post office there in that right hand, doesn't make sense. I mean, it makes sense if I'm a builder and I'm from Virginia and I don't live here, and I'm the homeowner here that has to live with it 24/7, it's a whole different ballgame. I have 2 kids, and, you know, it is a nice, quiet road back there, and that was never intended to have that go through, because if they sold it as a commercial property, it would have never had access through there to get to a commercial property. So now, it's a commercial property, really, that it's turned into a residential property, but the original plan was to have access off of 158. And now, with DOT, as long as you are so many feet from a traffic light or from Soundside Road, which you got plenty of room there to put in access, you just have to move it one way or another to conform to that, if that's, but, you know, and the other thing, I want to mention this is, it was mentioned the last time about the traffic light there. And I've only been there since May, and dealing with that traffic light, I don't know how many times I'm there. Traffic light turns red, okay? It does wait, there's a small amount of time before it turns green on Deering, but it's not enough time, because I don't know how many people go through that red light. And I'm just surprised there's not more accidents there. I think the DOT needs to delay that a little bit more to make sure, because even though the light turns green, I always look both ways, because you never know. And it's happened many times to me and my wife. So I'm just mentioning that in passing, that maybe the town could mention that to DOT, to have that timing a little bit different. But once again, I would say that the original plan with the access on the bypass is the way to go, and prevent all that additional traffic coming through. If I was going to buy a house on the bypass, I won't have to go 3/4 of a mile to get to my house, when I have to pass by it to get to it.
Mr. Mahoney, your time is up, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, and good year to everybody. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Michelle Chiminto, and I'm here to talk about the impact of the proposed access that we'll have on Soundside Road. I live at 4025 Soundside Road, and I have purchased and I'm in the process of renovating the home across from my house at 4016 Soundside Road for my elderly parents to move in. The impact that I see happening is for all of these all of the Southbridge residents actually, to avoid this Deering craziness, and it is craziness. I don't walk my dog or let my child ride his bike up to the post office and back, is because of the traffic and the speeding traffic. But I can see that the lesser of evils may be for Southbridge residents to come down Soundside Road as opposed to using Deering. I mentioned my son, he's 10 years old. He should be able to ride his bike in the 15-mile-an-hour zone that's in front of my home. When you start down the road by the church, it's 25 miles an hour. From experience and talking with neighbors, people usually get down to 25 miles an hour coming off the highway by the time they hit the second 25-mile-an-hour sign. So you're certainly not coming off of 158 and going 25 miles an hour. I find it difficult to do. But by the time you come around that curve and come down our road, it's 15 miles an hour, and nobody goes 15 miles an hour. I have a sign that's 2.5 feet tall, that's yellow, that says "Child at Play," that has a flag attached to it. And in the summertime, when we have so many visitors, I put that not in the middle of the road, but I put it on the edge of the road, outside of my driveway into the road, to try and slow people down. And it's funny, but in the wintertime, the few cars that we get are going even faster, because nobody's there, and it's the wintertime, and they are zooming right down in front of the house. And I can stand in my driveway and yell at people, slow down, and do the sign, and have the kids sign out. They just keep on going. So my concern is the additional traffic. I would love to have a stoplight at Soundside Road. That's for egress. That would be great. But still, that's, the impact on us. When my parents get here, my dad has dementia, and so he's no longer allowed to drive. So what does he do? He walks. Again, if people are going 15 miles an hour down our road, that's wonderful, but if we increase traffic on that road, that makes it even more dangerous for him than it is for my 10-year-old son. So that's part of the concern. The other concern is the runoff, all the way down to us, beyond where Coastal Villas is gonna be, and then you have the other section, and then you have us, because I'm not technically in Southridge. Last night, we came home, what time was it? 7:30? And the road there, and it's not from the storm, it's not from a hurricane, it's from wind. This particular time, it was just the wind. The wind was blowing over, and I had to drive my car, which is not a truck, four-wheel drive, or, sitting that high, through 4 inches of rain in a place that typically does not flood. In front of 4105 Soundside, it was a huge mess of water that I had to go through to get all the way through it. This morning, if anyone left out by the church, you would have seen 6 inches of sand that is built up where those pipes have been replaced. On the south side of the road, it was at least 6 inches of sand built up from the wind, not a hurricane, normal weather that we get. So those are mostly my concerns. I know the speeding is not, that's an old issue, but I just see with the increase of traffic, the additional speeders that are gonna be coming down our road. I don't know if we need to put those gigantic rubber speed bumps through there, or what we have to do. But if we increase the traffic, I just see an increase of the risk and the danger. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Schimento. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board? I think we've had a record number of participants today. If no one else wishes to address the board at this time, we will conclude the public comment session.
Okay. Thank you. Having concluded the public comment session, and since we are at a few minutes after 10, I suggest that the board take a 10-minute recess. Thank you very much. The board has returned to session. The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda, and a motion would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda would be presentations. Cliff?
Yes, sir. We have two this morning, and first, we'll have our annual report on from our auditor, Teresa Osborne.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm happy to be with you this morning to present the results of the Town of Nags Head's annual independent audit for the June 30th, 2019 fiscal year. The town has received an unmodified opinion on its financial statements, the best opinion you can receive. This opinion confirms that the town's financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. The town goes above and beyond the basic financial statement reporting requirements by preparing a comprehensive annual financial report, which provides additional statistical and historical information on the town's finances. The town has been awarded a Certificate of Achievement for its CAFR for 3 years from the National Government Finance Officers Association and has submitted this report to the GFOA. And your audit report was approved by the Local Government Commission on January the 5th. I would encourage you to read the transmittal letter and the management discussion and analysis sections of the audit for a user-friendly synopsis of the financial statements. The financial statements, I think, are about 150 pages long, so those are the two sections that I would go to just to give you a synopsis of the financial state of the town. I'd like to take just a few minutes this morning to review some financial highlights for the year by fund. The general fund is the largest fund comprising most governmental functions, except for those reported in the Water Fund and the Beach Nourishment Capital Project Fund. The town ended the year with an unassigned fund balance of $6,981,462. This is an increase of $602,774 from the prior year. This amount represents 39% of the general fund expenses. And the town has a minimum fund balance policy which instructs management to strive to maintain an unassigned fund balance of 50% of expenditures excluding bonded debt, but not less than $5 million. The ending fund balance is less than the 50%, but more than the minimum $5 million required by the policy. And that has been consistent for the last several years. Overall, the general fund ended the year with a very strong fund balance. The water fund accounts for the town's water operations. Operating revenues increased about 14% last year, and operating expenses increased by 9.8%. The largest part of the increase was attributable to the renovations to the South Water Tower, costing about $250,000. Operating income was a loss of $288,000, but without that major renovation project, you would have been close to break even in the water fund. Because of better investment rates, the change in net position of the water fund was much better in the fiscal year 19 than it was fiscal year 18. In addition to that, the water fund has some positive financial indicators, including a strong quick ratio analysis, which shows the short-term liquidity by comparing current assets to current liabilities, and your what we call quick ratio is definitely above the averages for governments your size. And you have a strong days sales and receivable ratio, which indicates how quickly the payments are being collected, and that's a strong ratio as well. You ended the capital reserve fund with $8,629,586. Most of that, a little over 8.3 of that total is set aside for beach nourishment. There are also reserves for stormwater, parks, and facility fees. Just wanted to let you know that the town did implement one new accounting standard this year. It's called GASB Statement 88. In all honesty, it didn't have a lot of effect on the town's financial statements, but it fine-tuned the disclosures required for debt placements. I want to end by confirming the town's strong financial position, as well as letting you know of the high caliber work being done by your finance department. They successfully transitioned to better financial software, Munis, which was a big undertaking but will benefit the town for years to come. I'd like to express my thanks to Amy Miller and the rest of the finance department for their work in producing this audit and for helping me when I was here during the field work portion of the audit. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. I'll ask the board if anyone has any questions.
No questions.
No? No. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Renee? Yeah, go ahead.
On page 47, where it talks about actuarial assumptions, it says our investment rate of return is 7%.
That is the investment rate of return that the actuary uses.
Is it realistic?
Probably no.
I didn't think so. So we're basing expenditures on, and investments on that, but that's not a
It's that, I want to say that's for the, let me find my place, Renee. I think that's for the,
I know the state
oh,
used to
that's
do that.
actually for the pension fund, and they actually may be getting that kind of a return on theirs. That's for the state pension fund. In their long-term investments, they may be getting that return. That's on the state retirement system.
All right, thank you.
Okay, no other questions. Thank you very much for your excellent work. We appreciate what you've been doing for us over the years. We also appreciate our financial staff and the wonderful work that they do. They really do keep us straight all year long, and that shows up in the audit, so thank you. Yes.
I want to thank you for all the work you've done, and we're surely going to miss you as you throw us to the curb. But we wish you well in your retirement, and have
Well,
some
I'm not
time off.
retiring. I do need to clarify that. I'm just getting out of the auditing field, so
We're sure going to miss you.
I will still be around.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
All right.
Cliff?
Next, we have County Manager Bobby Outen to come and present to you on the beach nourishment fund, how the funds are allocated, and just a summary of the fund in general. So, Bobby, thank you.
Good morning. Glad to be here. Good to see you all. Back before the holidays, the mayor and the manager and I met for a little while. We were talking about beach nourishment, talking about the fund, and they had some questions, and we were answering them and going through some of the details, some of the history, that kind of thing. And the mayor asked if I would be willing to come to one of your meetings to provide a similar summation, if you will, to you all. Some of this, Renee Webb, is going to be old hat to you. You all have been intimately involved in it for a number of years, and so things I'm going to tell you, you probably already know. And some of the things I'm going to tell you, you know more about than I do. So I apologize for that, but some of the other members of the board haven't been as intimately involved, and some of the public probably hasn't either, so it'll be an opportunity to sort of share where we are with the county, and also an opportunity for you all to ask any questions that you have. I'll tell you, if I can't answer the questions, I will find the answer for you and get back to you with that. I don't know how deep you want to dive as we get into this, but nonetheless, I'll go through it. As everybody knows, you all were the first to have beach nourishment here in Nags Head. You all had beach nourishment because the federal project that we all anticipated never came to fruition because we never got the federal funding, and you all decided you needed to move forward with beach nourishment on your own. At the time that you all decided that, none of the other towns were interested. We talked to the other towns, and you were really the only ones that were willing to give it a go at that time. So when we started talking about how are we going to pay for that, there were meetings between the town and the county about what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, what's the county's share going to be, what's the town's share. The county share comes out of a beach nourishment fund that's generated by the occupancy tax. That tax was put in place to fund the county share of that federal project that didn't occur. So now the town's going to do a project on its own with no state funds, and so the idea was let's use those funds that were set aside for that federal project and assist the town in completing the beach nourishment project that was sorely needed at the time. The net result of those negotiations, and I don't know the exact split, but it was close to a 50-50 split. The county paid for about 50% of the town's project out of those beach nourishment funds. And that wasn't on any magic formula per cubic yard or per foot or per anything. It was trying to balance the needs and what the town could afford with the fund, and also have some fund balance to do other things as we went forward. And when we got to the end of those discussions, that split, everybody was okay with. It worked for the town and it worked for the county, and so everyone moved forward with those splits. I think the day after the town finished their project, or was about to finish their project, we had a hurricane, and the project did as it was expected to do, and immediately the other towns that didn't do projects said, hey, I think we need to look at this as well. And so for a couple of years after that, the county managers and I meet every month and have lunch. I think the mayors meet every month and have lunch. And so among those groups, we had discussions about how are we going to fund these other town projects going forward, and how are we going to do this, and how are we going to use the fund. The philosophy at the county level was we have this beach nourishment fund that the only thing it can be used for is to put sand on beaches, and so we're going to use that fund to do that, and we're going to try to do it in a way that we can leverage the dollars as far as we can to put as much sand on the beaches in Dare County as we can within the limits of those resources. And so that was the basic premise that everybody was talking about. As we had those discussions with the town, we went to each town and said, are you in, are you out? We weren't going to hold out a part of the fund for some town that didn't know where they were going or what they were going to do and might not do anything for 20 years while another town was suffering and their infrastructure was falling in the ocean. So we said, you got to tell us what we're going to do because we're getting ready to allocate funds. At that time, Southern Shores was not interested, and Duck and Kitty Hawk and Kill Devil Hills were. And so we had conversations and we had meetings, and we spent a lot of time running models and running formulas to find a way to allocate our funds that would allow all three of those towns to do what they needed to do,
But at the same time, when we did the Nags Head project, we promised Nags Head a certain amount of money that we would have available for them in the future to do their maintenance, so that we could continue to partner with that town and do their maintenance going forward. We weren't going to invest $37 million in the beaches of Nags Head and turn around and let them go away because we spent the maintenance, or our share of the maintenance money, on another project somewhere else. So in all of this, we hold the maintenance dollars there for each project. So as we talked to those towns, we said, look, we've got this much money left in the fund. We've got to hold this much money available for Nags Head when they do their maintenance going forward. And with what's left, let's talk about how do we allocate those funds. And so we went through a lot of things. As we went through it, as we tried to look at it, trying to do it 50-50 didn't work. We didn't have enough money that we could pay 50% of everybody else's projects like we did in Nags Head. There wasn't enough money there to do that. The second thing that we found is we couldn't do it by foot. We couldn't take the number of feet that Nags Head did because some of the towns couldn't afford that. And one town would get way more than another, and it wouldn't make sense to do that. We couldn't do it by cubic yard. And so we kept struggling for ways to figure out how to fund it. What we finally settled on was we took what the county gave to the town of Nags Head, subtracted that out of what that cost, and Nags Head paid the rest. And if you took what Nags Head spent of their funds to do their project, and you divided it among the whole tax base, not just the MSD, but among the whole town, it came out to about 7.85 cents on the tax rate for everybody in town. And so 7.85 cents generates whatever the balance was that Nags Head needed. We went back and we ran that on the 3 towns that wanted to do it and said, if you took that and divided it among your whole town, do we have enough money with what we have plus what you would generate with that 7.85 cents to make your project work? And the answer was magically, yes, it did work. And so that made a way that we could say, truthfully, that we have tried as fairly as we could to treat each of the towns the same way. We tried to have the same impact on the tax base of each town as we allocate those funds. The net result of that isn't that everybody gets the same amount of money. Some towns get more, some towns get less based on the value of their tax base. But at least there was a way that you could say that we were trying to find that we could make it work for everybody. As we go through and do these things, there are several things that we have to hold. To leverage these funds, we do short-term borrowing. We assume that the life of a project is going to be 5 years, and we borrow money on a 5-year term so that by the time the maintenance comes, we've paid off that 5 years, and we start another 5-year term. And that allows us to leverage those dollars out in multiple maintenance cycles rather than have to pay it all in one lump sum up front and deplete the fund. So one of the things that we do is, as we allocate funds, is we hold dollars in a fund balance to meet the debt service for 1 year. Our concern would be that if we had a storm in May or in June that took away our whole season, that debt service number is going to still come due that year. We will not have the oxy-tax dollars that year to generate those funds. So we want to be sure we've got enough money set aside that we can handle that. And we've done that for each of the town projects and calculated what that is. So we hold that number there so that we can pay that debt service. The second thing is something I already mentioned, is we hold the dollars that are projected for future maintenance. We run models out 10 years. And so over the next 10 years is presumably 2 maintenance cycles, maybe less if your beaches last longer, but two maintenance cycles. And we make sure that under the projections that our consultants have given us on costs and all those sorts of things, we make those assumptions and we project out and we hold in that fund enough money that we can fund the maintenance. So when we pay for the projects that are going on, we pay for the current maintenance projects, we hold the fund balance for the debt service, and we hold the future maintenance for all the projects that we've invested in. We then look at what do we have left over. And when we look at that, that leftover, if you will, is what we have to do additional projects somewhere else. So Southern Shores is now talking about, that's no secret, so if Southern Shores comes in and wants to do a project, we can tell them we've got X amount of dollars, I think it's about $7.5 million right now, in the fund that can be used, that's not allocated to the other projects or the future of other projects, and that's available for projects. So when we talk to them, talk to the folks in Avon that are looking at it, then that's what we have. And so for those planners and those people in those areas, they know we've got that. How are they gonna come up with the difference? What are they gonna do to make up the difference? And so they're now doing their studies to find out what their costs are so that they can determine, you know, what those differences are. And so that's sort of the structure under which we operate the Beach Nourishment Fund. We're a little different than, say, Carteret County. I think you all heard from them. They have a finite number of beaches. Their demand isn't going to change. They're however many towns they've got. They're an island with inlets at both ends, and they're doing all of their beaches. And so there's not going to be a Southern Shores at Carteret that's going to come in and say, hey, we want to get in on the show and take the funds. Makes their planning a little bit easier because they don't have to worry about future needs. They know what their demand is. All they're looking at is projecting out their revenues and then planning how they spend those revenues over time to keep their beaches. Where we have demand that's going to increase over time, it makes it a little more difficult for us. But what we have done is we've assured all the towns, and I'll assure you here today, that what we've invested in now comes first, and there's no new projects coming to the detriment of it. We're not going to rob from the projects that we've already done to pay for a project that's not yet on the books. And so those are the underlying premises. We've run models. I think we're at version, these are the models we've run over time, but this is version
23A.
Well, this is 24 actually that I have here.
We leave that here?
Yeah, I'll get you a copy of it. And we've run actually more than 24 models because some of those models over time have had an A through G version of those. So there's lots of models that we've run. Every time somebody has a question about funding or whatever, we run the model again just to be sure that we're up to speed. And this was last run back in November. And so we keep track of it. The model has improved. Our dollars have improved a little bit over time. Because one, your project lasted longer than we anticipated. We modeled for a shorter maintenance cycle. And so there's a little bit of money there, not significant, but a little bit there. You know, some of the other assumptions have been a little better, but nothing significant that allows us to go out and do a new project. And so we keep on top of these models. We run them out 10 years. Doug Carter's group runs those. They've got all the numbers from all the towns. I think they work with all of that. Ken Wilson or Tim Canna give the Carters the assumptions on what future costs are going to be and what they see going on in the industry, and those numbers are plugged into the model as we run them each time. And so we plan on doing that. The future is going to be a little bit difficult, not for you all or for the towns that are already in, but for new projects because there's not a new source of revenue. The Beach Nourishment Fund doesn't grow as fast as the cost of beach nourishment, and so we don't have a lot of money to do a lot of new projects going down the road. And again, as I said before, we're not prepared to do new projects to the detriment of the ones that are currently on the books. So that's going to be a challenge. There is legislation out there to try to create a state beach nourishment fund, and certainly if that occurs, we're going to try to take advantage of that. But you know, down the road, funding is going to become the issue for new projects. You know, as costs increase, if the costs increase, we've got some inflationary factors built into models, and as long as the inflation costs rise at about the same rate as the growth of our fund, then we're all right. But when they get out of whack, then you know, certainly down the road, the fund could suffer if the costs become greater than the growth of the fund, and then we've got to regroup about how we together fund this. I will tell you that the cooperation among the towns, all the towns and the managers and the elected folks has been tremendous. There's no way we could have done all this without that. And so, you know, worked through all those issues and talked through all those issues. Kill Level Hills, that 7.85 cent that I told you about, if Kill Level Hills had applied that because their tax base is so large, they would have gotten nothing out of the fund, and it would have been 100% Kill Level Hills funding. No one thought that was fair, so there was a negotiated number for them to at least allow them to contribute something out of the Beach Nourishment Fund to their project as well. So that one didn't hold to the model, but they were satisfied to do that. They understood that they needed to be in the game themselves, and so they didn't push back on that as well. And so, again, those are the kind of things that have to be done among the elected folks to make these things work. And I think they've done a tremendous job. Again, the manager and I talk often. It seems like not many times we have our lunch together that we don't talk about beach nourishment, so that we can all be aware of what's going on, if there are problems or concerns. That's sort of where we are, how we get where we are, how we do things, how the future holds. And I don't know how much detail more that you want or whatever other questions you might have, but I'm glad to stay as long as you want to answer those questions.
Thank you, Bobby. Before we start with questions, I want to recognize County Commissioner Ross, who joined us after the break. Thank you very much for coming in, Nags Head resident. Appreciate you being here. And so I will open this up to the board members. I'll start down
Sure.
here.
Thanks for coming, Mr.
Sure.
Can you explain how much of the occupancy tax we get for beach nourishment? Not the town, the county.
I think that
I don't think they know.
the
I mean,
fund generates about $9 million a year, a little over that a year.
and how many cents goes towards beach
2.
nourishment? 2 cents towards beach nourishment.
And that's by statute. It can't go anywhere else.
Correct. And that's divided amongst, as you said, tax base is how you're dividing it now. Have you ever thought about dividing it as need-based?
Yes. Nags Head got 50% of it because they needed it.
Because of the higher erosion rate?
Well, no, because you were the first project in and nobody else was on the table, and that was the way to make Nags Head be able to afford to do a project.
So moving forward, you said you haven't thought much about where the money's coming from to support Dare County.
Didn't say I hadn't
overall.
thought about it. I said I don't know where it's coming from. Yeah, we've thought about it.
Why not increase the tax, occupancy tax, another 3 cents? Dedicate 5 cents to beach nourishment for the whole county. Put a committee together and let that committee decide where it goes and comes. And take the burden off of the folks that live here and don't get to use the beach as much as.
That'd be a
the
home
tourists.
run if we could accomplish that.
Why
I'll
can't we
tell you
accomplish
that,
it?
well, there have been multiple attempts in my tenure to raise the occupancy tax for various reasons, including beach nourishment, including inlet dredging and many other things. They've all been unsuccessful. There's not an agreement or a written understanding, but in the legislature at least, there's a consensus between the legislature and the North Carolina Travel and Tourism Lobby that they will all accept, what, 6%, is that right? 6 cent? 6 cent for towns and counties throughout the state to have occupancy taxes. But if anybody comes in asking for more than that, they'll fight it. And they're a significant lobby for the hotel motels and all the tourism industry. And so they have been successful each time that issue has come up. I mean, we're not talking about 5 cents, we're talking about a penny or a half a penny. We're even talking about, as it was a huge debate and a fight to get them to agree to let us use the 2 cent that we're using for beach nourishment out of the occupancy tax. Even though we were saying it was tourism related and all that, they were saying it wasn't direct, and we were saying, how can that not be direct? Anyway, we went back and forth. So that's not something that's easily done. It's something that's been thought about by many. It's been tried a number of times. It's been unsuccessful each time. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just means we haven't had the political clout to get that done.
With Hannick in office, you can't push on Hannick?
With you name the legislator in office, and we haven't been able to get it done for 15 years.
Renee?
Bobby, thank you very much. Your presentation was really informative. I found it interesting how you arrived at the 7.85. That seems to have worked. And we're very appreciative of the millions of dollars that we've gotten out for our beaches. And our citizens have also, as you know, we've kept the assessment in place for town-wide the whole time since we've implemented it. And then we took a year off for the oceanfront based on the commitment we made when we first started beach nourishment. And that is back on, and it generates a pretty significant amount to pay for this project we're in right now, which, as you can say, it doesn't matter when we finish it, a storm comes along, as we had this fall with that long-term nor'easter that we had in November. Interesting to hear how you've planned for the renourishment of all the towns. I know that there's a lot of pressure coming along to do projects on Hatteras Island. You've done one in Buxton, now you're looking at one in Avon. It's going to, as you go forward with that, we all have municipal service districts and so forth. I would hope that we all get skin in the game and have a healthy municipal service district as all projects. That will only make the fund healthier as we do that.
We've done that. In our Buxton project, we used the same 7.85 or whatever and taxed the folks in Buxton. Now, the tax base in Buxton is so small that that didn't generate any significant amount of money, but we thought it was only fair that they contribute like everybody else, and so their MSD contributes something along the lines of what your MSD does. Certainly, if we did anything anywhere else, we would do the same thing. Our board has been adamant that the locality where we do the nourishment has to do their share as well.
I agree, and I think as we all go forward, we're all going to be studying MSDs in general, about how to do even stormwater perhaps as an MSD and different things. But I know the issues down there are a little bit different than we have here, because one of the reasons you do nourishment down there is you got to protect those roads too. So your MSD could theoretically be road wide.
Well, or, you know, and we've been hammering on DOT. I mean, you know, we're doing a lot of work. We're not criticizing them, but, you know, there needs to be some, we would hope, cooperation there as well.
Put some skin in the game in that.
Sure. Well, and they did. I mean, in Rodanthe, they did just that until the,
Right.
to hold that till the bridge got built, so.
They did. Anyway, thank you very much. If there's any way that the towns can help try to push forward any legislation, I would hope that you would let us know and let each town know.
For sure.
Because you're right, it does need to be expanded, and I'm aware of the agreements that they have. And the travel and tourism lobby is extremely large. So we got to figure out ways to get the people off the ocean front interested in increasing to do some of their projects, and perhaps we can have more of a statewide lobby.
Just one thing to add to that, you're aware of it because you've been in it, but not for Mr. Sears because he hasn't. You got to be careful what you wish for. When you go up there and ask the legislature for another penny or 2 pennies on your oxy tax, then you've opened the door for scrutiny on your oxy tax, and they may come in and decide you've got too much oxy tax, or they may decide that you're not using it where they think you should use it and change the parameters under it. So you can't box them into what you're asking for. So there's been some reluctance to go up there. We've got an oxy tax system that we believe works well for the towns and for the county. We would sure hate to go up there to try to improve it and have them, you know, mess it up. So that's an issue that you have to be aware of.
Do you audit your occupancy tax to ensure that you're getting what you should be getting based on the actual amount of visitation? And how often do you do, if you do?
I'm not sure if I understand your question.
Do you, all right, say we have $9 million coming in, should we have gotten 9.1 or should we have gotten 8.6 based on
If you're asking me,
the
do
amount
we
of?
collect 100% of the taxes on every occupancy that's eligible in Dare County? I would tell you no. I would tell you that we have a staff that goes through all that stuff. We have a staff that goes through the Airbnb stuff, the VRBOs. They try to follow up on that. But, you know, if the lady in Roanoke, Virginia owns a cottage in Nags Head and rents it to the people in her church and doesn't go through Airbnb or VRBO or list it online or put it on the TV, in the paper where we can find it, then there's almost no way we can know about that. And we're certain that that goes on, there's no question about
For
that.
years.
But
Do you have a mechanism that tracks what actually we can know?
yes, our tax office, that's what they do. They have people that are, that's all that they do, is try to track.
So the
those
rental
numbers.
company send in a form and says, we rented X amount this week and you collected X amount.
They send in the form. The problem with what they send us is they send us the gross number, they don't send us the breakdown. And they say the breakdown is proprietary, and so we've had difficulties verifying the numbers that they get.
Gotcha. Mecklenburg is 2 cents higher due to a racetrack.
I'm sorry,
Mecklenburg gets 8 cents because of a racetrack.
Mecklenburg has clout that we don't.
Just letting you know, it's possible.
They have lots of legislators, I think.
They do. Thank you. Commissioner Brinkley.
Thank you for being here.
Sure.
I'm new into the beach nourishment and the funding and stuff, so I'm trying to learn. And you talked about having money for Nags Head maintenance. How much money is allocated, or do you have aside for maintenance for Nags Head?
For which year?
So it's, well, okay, say we do another maintenance project in 5 years.
Yeah, I have that.
I think if I'm looking right, it's in 2025, it's estimated that we'll do a $25 million project.
Right.
So it's $12.5 million.
Right, or thereabouts,
And
yeah.
it was just,
Yeah.
when we listened to the presentation from Rudy from Carteret County, obviously that was new to me as well. And you mentioned Carteret County, and you talked about them having a finite number of project areas, so it's easier for them. What would it take for Dare County to have something like that? Could we get?
Well, see, they've got, their towns encompass their whole island from one inlet to the other. And they nourish from one end to the other, from one inlet to the other end, the other inlet. And so today, they can tell you exactly how many miles of beach need nourishment and can get nourishment in Carteret County. We can't do, we don't know. We know how many miles of beach we have, but we can only afford to do what we're doing. And right now, we only know that we have 2 projects. One day, we're gonna need to do something at Isabel Inlet, and one day, we're gonna need to do something at the Canal Zone, or somebody's gonna need to do something in those areas along Hatteras Island that you know are problematic. Southern Shores wants to do a project, and you don't know where your next hotspot's gonna be either, because I'll use Avon. Avon was never considered, never thought about. Avon, 6 years ago, had 2 dunes and 200 or 300 feet of beach. And in a period of like 5 years, they've lost those dunes, and the waves are breaking in the pools behind the house. Nobody would have ever anticipated that erosion rate, and nobody can tell us why it accelerated in that short term, but yet it did. And so as we look down the unnourished parts of Dare County, the question becomes when and where are they going to need nourishment? We can predict some. We may not be able to predict others, but our funds only go as far as they go. Carteret has a finite number of beaches and a finite fund, and they've got enough in their fund that covers the finite amount of beaches that they have. And we don't have that luxury. That's why theirs is different than ours.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fuller.
Not for the hardballs. No.
I don't know, that's the first answer.
First of all, I just want to say, I really do appreciate the cooperation between the towns and the county. I mean, you know, we've worked tremendously well. If you go outside of Dare County, you find a lot of interaction that's not always positive between counties and towns. And I think, you know, once we always cross the bridge together, we're always on the same page. And it's been a great relationship that we've had going way back on a number of different ventures. And I certainly appreciate what we've done. The first point I really want to make is I certainly agree with Commissioner Cahoon about the municipal service districts and everybody having skin in the game. And, you know, from a time perspective, just want to make sure that there's equity at some level with projects that are in the unincorporated and the town. Just a statement, same as Commissioner Cahoon. And then just one other point, and it's actually a question, but at one time, the Division of Water Resources did have a pool of money for beach nourishment. Are you saying that does not exist anymore? And now, when I say that, Division of Water Resources collected money that made 1/2 of the local match being state and local government. But it was only available for those communities that had federally funded projects. So is that still going on? And if that's going on, then all we've got to do is get them to change the concept of federally funded to just projects.
All we got to do is find the money. There's legislation that's already been adopted to create the fund. There's just no money in the fund. So we don't have the issue. What you're saying is correct. I think they're still funding the state shares of the federal projects.
So there is state money going to beach nourishment?
But only for the federal projects. And so for us to get beach nourishment from projects here, there's got to be a revenue source at the state to put in the fund that they can then distribute out to the local governments. And that doesn't exist yet. That's been talked about. And again, there was legislation passed in not this current one, but the last session that created, I'll use an example. The Inlet Management Fund is a pretty robust fund and has done a great job with providing local governments funding to manage inlets. That was created in one legislative session but was unfunded. And then in one of the subsequent sessions, they found a funding mechanism and put money in it, and it's been operating ever since. They've done a similar thing with the Beach Nourishment Fund. They have created the fund, but whether they're going to do that in this next legislative session or not, I don't know, but they haven't yet legislated the dollars or appropriated the dollars to go in that fund like they did with the Inlet Management Fund. And so the Rudies and the Bobbies and all over the world that are dealing with this, we're talking with our folks, telling them about that, telling them that we've got to get that, and we'll see where it goes. They seem to acknowledge that it's necessary or they wouldn't have adopted the legislation.
Thank you.
Yep.
Follow? Thank you very much, Bobby.
Okay,
We really appreciate
thank
you
you.
coming in, bringing everybody
Sure.
up to speed.
And anytime you have questions, please feel free to call.
Okay,
Sure.
great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda are public hearings, and public hearing number 1 is to consider proposed text amendments.
Mr. Mayor, if I may introduce the public hearing on this.
Yes, sir.
This matter is a legislative matter in which the board does not need to receive sworn evidence or anything like that. But it is a public hearing to consider proposed text amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance that will pertain to off-street parking requirements associated with alternative and reduced parking, which will include bicycle parking and associated conditional use permitting requirements. And to begin the hearing, we'll start with a presentation of the town's analysis of this from Planning Director Michael Zener.
So thank you. Good morning again. So we're returning to you with an amendment to the UDO regarding parking and bicycle parking and conditional use permit requirements for parking reductions from the discussion that was held at the Board of Commissioners retreat back in September. Before I jump into that, I do want to correct a couple or point out a couple of errors that were in the adoption ordinance. You want to bring that up? And it's really just two typos. On the screen, you'll see thank you, the ordinance, and if you go to the second page under Part 2, the word commercial that I've highlighted there was accidentally omitted from the title of that section. We are proposing to change the title of that section, but we did want to make sure that that was correctly identified. And then if you scroll to, I believe, page 6 of 7 under Part 3, there's a typo I've highlighted here, be amended by instead of be amended be. So just those two typos that I wanted to bring to your attention. And the town clerk had brought those to my attention yesterday, and I believe she has a corrected copy of that should the board adopt the ordinance. So jumping into the intent of the ordinance, the discussion that the board had at their retreat was generally to have us look at the provision of bicycle parking in the ordinance. Currently, In some cases, in some instances, you are allowed to provide, a development is allowed to provide a certain amount of bicycle parking and reduce the required number of parking spaces by one. Generally, when you have more than 10 parking spaces, you're allowed to provide a bicycle rack that accommodates five bicycles and reduce the required parking by one space. And you're allowed to do that up to 3 times as long as you have at least 30 spaces. You can reduce it by 3 spaces with 3 bike racks. And in the current ordinance, it appears as though it's a performance-based standard. You provide those racks, you can reduce the parking. It's not identified as a conditional use, although it does say that the commissioners may allow for that reduction. So what we did to address that, and this was really came up from the discussion that the planning board had, they've allowed, or what we're recommending is, you're allowed to have that reduction by right, as long as you have frontage along South Virginia Dare Trail NC 12 or along South Old Oregon Inlet Road. So if you have a site that has frontage along those roads where we know that you have bike accommodations in terms of a bike path, you're allowed to have that reduction by right. Anywhere else, you have to seek it with a conditional use permit, and you can only do so if you have those facilities and you have frontage along a two-lane road. Anywhere else, you could not even seek the reduction by conditional use permit. Something else we also did, we standardized the findings for all conditional use permits. So currently, there are 4 conditional use permit methods to adjust parking. And we standardized the findings for those 4, but also added the 5th reduction method by conditional use permit for bike parking. And so, and I'll walk you through the ordinance where you can find those in a second. And then finally, we also, well, there's probably a 4th, but 3rd, we created minimum parking standards for bicycle parking. So sites that are along a 2-lane road would be required to provide at least 1 bike rack if they were required to provide 10 or more parking spaces. And then finally, we also made sure that we updated other references to the affected sections throughout the UDO. So I'm happy to walk through the ordinance amendment very quickly. So Part 1, Section 10.14, we clarified the administration of this and made sure the references were appropriate. That's more of a housekeeping item. Section 2, or Part 2 rather, Section 10.15 is where we really codified the new standards. So we created a Section 10.15.1 where the performance-based standards exist. So the 2 performance-based standards, and this is an existing one, the shared parking associated with a new use or new development on adjacent property. That's a current provision where it allows for shared parking agreements to satisfy parking between 2 sites. They are required to be a recorded easement, sharing parking, and essentially the best way to explain that practice or that method is where you have 2 sites side by side, where the total required parking between the 2 sites or the uses on the 2 sites is not reduced. It just may be that you shift the responsibility for some of the parking to an adjacent property, so that one site may have less parking than is required for the uses on that site, but the total parking between the 2 sites is provided. And it's fairly rigid in that it does require cross easements to be recorded, unlike some projects that we may have seen recently where there were agreements that could be broken. And I think this requires something more stringent than that. And then we also, again, required or inserted the provision that requires or allows for a reduction of required parking with the use of bicycle. Again, performance-based, only in the instances where the property has frontage along NC 12, South Virginia Dare Trail, or NC 1243, South Old Oregon Inlet Road. Each rack must be highly visible and conveniently located. That's something that's a current standard. Each bike rack must support 5 bikes, and the parking reduction shall not exceed 1 parking space per 10 parking spaces provided. And then we established the provisions for parking methods or parking modifications or reduction methods requiring a conditional use permit. And again, we now have those 5 reduction methods. We have standardized required findings for those reduction methods. 4 of these exist today: the shared parking associated with a conditional use plan or plan amendment, shared parking when 2 or more commercial uses exist on one commercial site or adjoining commercial uses on separate properties, that exists today. Off-site parking to meet use requirements, that exists today. And the final one, modification of parking requirements or general reduction of required parking, exists today. The new requirement, back to what the board had indicated to staff, is a reduction of required parking for commercial uses with the use of bike racks by conditional use permit. And again, that can only be sought where the subject property has frontage along a 2-lane roadway or a sidewalk or similar path crosses the property or is located along the frontage of the property. You could seek a conditional use permit for that. And the standards, again, are the same as the by right provision. And then what we also did, part 3, is amended the commercial design standard requirements related to parking lot design, and added a provision that a bike rack shall be provided on all properties in non-residential use with parking lots having 10 or more vehicle parking spaces when such properties are located on the east side of US 158 and have frontage on a 2-lane roadway. Such bike racks shall support at least 5 bicycles and be accessible to the public. And then the last part, part 4, would clarify the references, would correct the references based on these amendments throughout the UDO. Again, the planning board recommended, based on what's before the board in terms of dealing with bike parking and conditional use permits in this manner. Staff is supportive of that recommendation. We believe that what's being proposed is consistent with the policies of the comprehensive plan. We believe that these amendments would advance the public health, safety, and welfare of the town. And I think I indicated in my staff report the process for UDO amendments that is required of the Board of Commissioners. There are certain statements that the board may want to consider, and we believe, again, that the amendment is consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan and is reasonable in the public interest. So I welcome any questions that the board may have.
All right, are there any questions for Mr. Zehner?
No questions.
Question, Webb. Kevin, I have a question about 1015.2.5.1. That a sidewalk or similar path crosses the property or is located along the frontage of the property. And I want to make sure that that would be read as meaning that the path or sidewalk is on your side of that road, not within the right-of-way that constitutes the road frontage for the property, which means it could be on the opposite side of a 5-lane road, for example. In other words, I'm thinking of properties in the commercial zone that are on the east side of 158, where the multi-use path is on the west side of 158. They would not be eligible for this bicycle parking standard, as I think that's what's intended. I just want to make sure that that's what that means.
That was the intent. And if the board wanted to clarify it, I suppose you could say, or is located within the right-of-way immediately adjacent to the subject property.
Repeat that. Clarify that one more time, please.
My question?
Yes.
Yes, which is that thinking about properties along 158 that are on the west side.
Okay,
And there is a multi-use path within the right-of-way, but it's on the opposite side. And my understanding is our interest was not that that would count for the purpose of bicycle parking. So if that's the way everybody's going to understand that, that's fine. I just want to be clear.
That was our understanding of the board's intent.
Okay.
Any other questions for Michael? All right, anything further, Mike?
Yeah, I believe I did read one additional typo when I was reading over this. So it's in the 10.92.15.3. The third line, I believe, when such properties are located instead of and located. This and right there.
Yeah, so that should be R, right?
Correct.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anything further from staff on this? All right, at this time, any member of the public who wishes to comment on this proposed text amendment may do so. If you'll just please approach the podium, tell us who you are, and address your comments on this proposed UDO text amendment to the board. Nobody? All right. Does the board wish to receive any other information regarding this before you begin your deliberations on the proposed amendment? Board members? All right, at this time, we will conclude the public hearing, and the board may deliberate on this proposed UDO amendment.
Thank you.
I make a motion to approve as presented with the appropriate corrections.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to approve it as presented. Is there any further discussion needed by the board? Great. All right. Thank you, planning staff, for responding to that request from the board. So we have a motion and a second. No further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda is an update on short-term rental registrations.
Thank you, Mayor. I provided the board with a memo and attachments that I believe was responsive to the board's interest. But the memo is a timeline, essentially, in bulleted form, discussing some of the milestones that we've taken to get from adoption of the ordinance amendments in April of 2019 to where we are today. We began the registration program in August. Between August and December 5th, we saw 28 short-term rental units registered. We then decided to, well, we were doing a few things at that time. We contacted and reached out to the Outer Banks Visitors Bureau because we were wanting to understand, we understood that they had a perspective about the number of short-term rentals in town and wanted to understand at least what we were, what our expectations should be in terms of the number of registered units. And it's probably important to mention as well that technically the registration requirement was not in place per the adoption until January 1 of 2020. So anyone registering prior to that time, we were thankful that they did, and it did benefit them in that they can continue to operate through 2020 without registering again until September 1st. But nonetheless, we were reaching out to the Visitors Bureau, and they provided us with some interesting information in terms of the number of short-term rental units that may be operating within the town, at least that they could identify on the platforms, on the Airbnb and HomeAway platforms. And we understand that that data was provided to them by a company known as AirDNA, which at least, and you can see a steady increase month by month. And the highest recorded number of units, whether those are full or partial, and the vast majority were full whole house rentals or whole unit rentals. There were a total of 1,450 short-term rental units offered for rent within July of 2019. And I believe that was an increase of almost 500 from the July of the previous year. So obviously, this is a evolving marketplace, and increasing marketplace in the community, as it is in a lot of communities. We also in December, and we had a previous list from the Dare County Tax Collector that didn't maybe identify as many short-term rentals using the platforms such as Airbnb and HomeAway and VRBO. But they provided us with a new updated list of rental units within the town, approximately 2,200 rental units. And that list does identify who is managing or who they receive the taxes from. Some of the units, there's no identification. The majority of the units identifies whether it's the owner. Many of the traditional management companies that operate in town, or in many cases, a short-term rental platform such as Airbnb or HomeAway. And based on that, we can estimate that at least 600 units could be eligible for registration under the program. And I say could be because of those 600 units on that list, it's likely that some of them may self-pay their taxes versus having someone else do it on their behalf. And even though there may be a unit that's rented on a platform such as Airbnb, they may be managed professionally by a management company or a real estate professional. So it's some subset of that 600 that we believe is required to be registered. And I think we will continue to refine that. But it has proven to be a reliable list in terms of when we've registered and looking at that list, whether Dare County has been aware of them previously. And the majority of them, they have been already aware that they are used as short-term rentals. So December 6th, we decided to release a press release reminding owners about the registration requirement. And that generated between December 6th and December 31st an additional 41 short-term rentals being registered. So as of December 31st, literally as of December 31st, because there were a few that were processed that day, we had a total of 69 units registered. 60 of those were whole house short-term rentals, 9 were partial house short-term rentals. And then, again, I mentioned this earlier, those that registered prior to December 31st or on or prior to December 31st, they don't have to do anything at this point. They are compliant with our ordinance if they continue to operate and offer those units for rent. They would just need to register again by September 1st of 2020. The issue is that as of January 1, those that had not registered would technically be in violation if they were offering a unit for rent. They have 30 days upon offering a unit for rent to register. So that's something that if we were, for instance, to identify that someone was in violation if they were offering a unit for rent, they'd not yet registered, they didn't register in 2019, had not yet registered in 2020, they would have 30 days to cure that, that registration or lack of registration. As of this week, we had 9 units registered in 2020. They were not, of those 9, none had registered previously in 2019, so these are 9 new registrants, and because they've registered in 2020, they're allowed to continue to operate without registering again until September 1st of 2021. So at this point, I think moving forward, what we intend to do, we intend to work off that Dare County list to try to identify at least the ones that we have certainty that are STRs that have not registered and consider a mailing to those. That will also, we'll need to determine a budget allowance in terms of the postage for that, but I think we can certainly do that. We intend to remind those or send an email. We have contact emails for all of the people that have registered. For the ones that have registered in 2019, thanking them for their registration and reminding them that they only need to register again by September 1st of 2020. I think, again, we believe that the vast majority that have registered based on that so far, that Dare County tax collector is aware of units that should be registered or should be remitting occupancy tax. I'm not sure of the process by which they reach out and collect that occupancy tax, but we believe they have an awareness of the vast majority of those units. And then I think finally, we do intend to make a list of the registered short-term rentals available to the police and fire department, because we also want to make sure, and this was, I understand largely the intent of the ordinance and the registration requirement, that there be contact information available for property owners that were renting units outside of a traditional management company in case there were an emergency at the property involving a guest or the property itself, and that they could be readily contacted. So we will make that list of registered units available to the police and fire department. And I think that's all I have, unless there's any questions from the board.
Well, I was going to start with questions down this way before, and I didn't have any, so I'll start down this way at this time. Commissioner Fuller, do you have questions?
I appreciate everything, and it provides us the information we requested. I think that our next step, at least from my standpoint, would be, we've got what we asked for. But I still see sort of a public safety issue, and what I want to ensure is there's a new sort of platform out there, if you will, called concierge services, which are people that do not meet the criteria of property management. Property management has to be approved by a state regulatory body. These concierge services are people that rent Airbnbs for people, and they don't meet the state standard. And I want to make sure that those people that do rent Airbnbs provide the proper egress, ingress, fire safety, everything else that the approved state mandated property managers are required to inspect each year on homes. That may be a board retreat issue, but it's just where I'm coming from as a next step.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Brinkley.
Mike, thank you for the staff work and providing the information. Just out of curiosity, the 9 that have been registered since in 2020, do you have the breakdown of that, whether they're whole house or partial house?
I believe off the top of my head, eight or 7 of those were whole house, and the 1 or 2 were partial. Yep.
That's it, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cahoon.
Thank you, Mike. It's been really informative.
Good.
Just a point for my benefit. The ones that registered in not 2019 have to re-register in 2020?
Yes, ma'am.
The ones that registered in January have until 2021?
Correct.
Okay. And looks like to me we've got a lot more to do to figure out how to get the rest of that 600 units to register.
Yes.
And you're right. You've given us everything we asked for. Now it's time for us to make a decision as to what our next step is. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you and the staff, Mike. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is consideration of a preliminary plat for a major subdivision known as Coastal Villas.
So thank you. Again, this is a major subdivision, preliminary plat for a major subdivision known as Coastal Villas. The property is approximately 300 feet south of the intersection with West Soundside Road and 158 on the west side of 158. It's approximately 10 acres, 9.86 acre property. Originally, it was identified as a 6th phase of South Ridge, and the applicant elected to change the name of it to Coastal Villas. The process for the review of this under our ordinance is a preliminary sketch initially, where that's reviewed by the UDO administrator, myself, but I farm that out to staff that would be involved with technical review of any project. And I think I provided, as an attachment, an email where I returned comments on that preliminary sketch review back to the applicant. That original plan, as you heard it referenced earlier, and I think I allude to it in the staff report, that original plan did have singular access from 158. At that time, the plan had 18 lots. When the plan was submitted for the preliminary plan, preliminary plat stage where we are now, the applicant elected to provide access through an existing paper street that was created when Section 4 of Southridge was platted, and forego the access from 158. And that reduced, because of the layout of the street, that reduced the number of lots from 18 to 17. We understand, obviously, that there's a lot of concern about the access point. From a regulatory standpoint, we believe that this plat, as presented, meets the requirements of our ordinance. That's not to say that certainly the board or the applicant may wish to consider access off of 158. I think when we initially reviewed that access, I think the concerns that were shared, is that an ideal condition, having a singular access point onto 158. I tend to think that an ideal condition perhaps may be access off of 158 and through Mariners Way, because it might allow for traffic to be broken up, accessing off of Deering in terms of the total subdivision. But again, I don't believe that we can, at least from staff's position, can make that a requirement, and didn't see fit to make that a requirement when we were reviewing the sketch plan or the preliminary plat. I'm happy to go over each of the standards that the plat is subject to. We believe that they've satisfied those standards. Again, and I think right now, unless the board has any other questions, I can focus on, again, the access, but also stormwater. Stormwater review did go through review by the town engineer. There were several, I believe at least 2 rounds of comments from the town engineer that necessitated responses or revisions from the applicant, and ultimately those were satisfied. The town engineer's comments were satisfied. I believe, in his opinion, he would say that the plan was prepared soundly in terms of being prepared by a licensed engineering professional, and that they have demonstrated compliance with the standards that are in the ordinance. I think the board is aware that because of the location of this project, because of the size of this project, it will trigger a state stormwater permit as well. So the applicant, prior to land development, would have to submit plans to the state for review and the issuance of a permit as well. I think some of the concerns about the standard and how water may be accommodated on site, how stormwater may be accommodated on site. There is an elevation change on Mariners Way where this is, I believe, 2 feet higher than the intersection with Seabass Court, but the roadway is pitched slightly where the south side of the road is slightly higher than the north side of the road, so that stormwater will flow into a swale that runs along the north side of Mariners Way. And this was a specific question that came up from the town engineer to the applicant, to the applicant's design engineer at our technical review meeting, and they believe they've designed it appropriately to accommodate that.
Michael,
yes.
Could you tell me again where that stormwater is going to be directed to flow?
So ultimately, and I would probably defer to the design engineer, but ultimately the water flows along the roadway swales, and ultimately, let me find the actual stormwater plan. And will ultimately flow into an easement here, into an infiltration basin here, that any excess would overflow into a downstream collection that is behind, I believe, properties along Soundside Road into a natural wetlands condition there. And that was also a point that was raised by the town engineer in the, yes?
Is that gonna be is that gonna be put on the deeds of the properties, that it's gonna be a dedicated stormwater easement?
So, yes, in a couple of different ways. So, there's infiltration basins here,
That's gonna be on every deed as well?
yes, and they would be, so the easements would be deeded to the homeowners. And
But is it gonna be on the property deed, so that anybody that buys that property, when they go to look at their deed, is gonna have on there a legal restriction that this is a stormwater easement?
Yeah.
Stormwater basin?
I believe, let me check my conditions. So my recommended condition number 3 is that prior to, in conjunction with approval of the final plat for the subdivision, drainage easements to be the responsibility of the applicant, developer, and/or their successors, i.e. the property owners association, shall be properly conveyed by recordation with the Dare County Register of Deeds. Such easements shall be reviewed and approved by the UDO administrator prior to recordation, and the UDO administrator may refer the easements to the town attorney for review and comment.
Okay. Lot 21 is not in section 6, it's in section 5. So is there already a restriction for the stormwater of the road to go into that area? You referenced lot 21 right there.
Mhm.
You referenced the road would drain into that area. Is there a restriction already on lot 21 dedicating that?
There is not, and that's where it's important to clarify that only some of these stormwater infiltration basins are going to be privately owned. The ones that are in the right-of-way, which would include the one along Mariners Way, would be accepted or put forward for acceptance by the town. So the town would own that swale.
If it accepted it?
Correct. The town currently owns this right-of-way, the paper
We
right-of-way
own the right,
for that
but it's not
section.
improved yet.
Correct, yes. That's correct. And again, I do want to clarify and state that again. So there are easements or there are infiltration basins along the rear of these lots. Those would be privately owned. They would be located on private lots. They would be within easements that would convey to the property owners. There are also easements along the common property lines that are perpendicular to the street. Those, again, would also be on those private lots within easements that would be conveyed to the property owners. Responsibility of those.
So if I buy, I'll use lot 5,
Mhm.
and I have lived there, and I have a drainage easement.
Can you clarify which page you're looking at for lot 5, because they're not consistent?
Yes, I understand that, so I'm gonna, whatever, this is either sheet 2 or 3. I believe it looks like sheet 2.
Okay.
And I have this easement on my property for drainage. I have a swale. Those that I see there that are shared on the property line, they are subject to easement?
Correct.
And I've lived there for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and I decide that I'm tired of it. I haven't seen much water in it. And I decide to fill it. The enforcement then is from whom? The homeowners association?
I think you have multiple opportunities for enforcement. It would be inconsistent or in violation of this approved plan. It would be in violation of the stormwater permit from the state, and it would seem to be in violation of the easement that we would assume would be recorded there. So I think there's multiple options for recourse there.
Through what mechanism?
Excuse me?
Through what mechanism?
I would expect enforcement of our own ordinances, at least locally. I couldn't speak to what enforcement the state would have. I suspect, absent of any state or local enforcement, that the property owners could pursue it civilly. I'll defer to Mr. Leidy if that's incorrect.
That's my
And how is the town going to enforce it?
view.
We would issue a notice of violation, and if it wasn't resolved, we'd issue a civil citation. And if it weren't addressed at that point, I assume we would have court action. I think it's also important to recognize that the individual development of each of these lots technically would be subject to our residential stormwater ordinance. The presumption is that by providing many of these stormwater infiltration means up front, that they would somehow be utilized to satisfy our residential stormwater ordinance as well. So there's going to be a dual purpose for these in terms of satisfaction of the stormwater requirements for a subdivision, but also the residential stormwater requirements for each of the lots.
If we're ready for questions, I'm going to start with Commissioner Sears.
None of this water is being piped out to go to the sound. It's all in infiltration basins, correct?
So any overflow, and I probably would want to defer in terms of the exact operation to the design engineer, Kathleen Saunders with Quibel, but it's my understanding that the intent is for the majority of the water to infiltrate before it even arrives at this basin here. That the overflow from that would go into natural channels that they were required to demonstrate were sufficient to the satisfaction of the town engineer, which they did, and that the natural channels make their way into a wetland system that exists behind this property, between this property and Soundside Road. And that there would not be a direct discharge to the sound, no. I think again, I would, yes.
Can you identify the wetland system, the wetland area that you're discussing?
Sure.
Is it with the well point? Because the church is between the road and the subdivision.
No, I think eventually waters naturally flow into this wooded area behind Soundside Road.
And that property is still owned by the same development?
No, I don't believe it is.
So
Owned by
you're
a single
talking,
individual.
so you're talking about putting stormwater from this development onto somebody else?
Private property.
So it currently happens. So and I was, if I can explain. So the intent of a stormwater management plan for a site like this, for any site, is that the developed state of the property doesn't result in stormwater conditions that exacerbate existing conditions in terms of quantity or quality of water flowing from the property. This is the natural overflow of property results in water leaving this site in that general area and flowing naturally into that wetland area. And essentially, what the applicant is required to do is demonstrate that water leaving this site under the developed state doesn't increase in terms of the quantity or quality of that water from existing conditions.
Have they done groundwater table samples to determine that if this was all hardscaped out with houses, that it would not increase groundwater in an area that they don't own?
I believe that was part of their review, but I would defer to the applicant's design engineer on that.
I don't have any other questions.
Michael, to what extent, when the access question came up, to the best of your knowledge, to what extent was the access to 158 anywhere along this frontage a safety question for traffic on 158? Not a fire response question, not a rescue or police response. To what extent was whether there was an access a 158 traffic consideration?
So again, we did review that and discuss that internally, but with the applicant as part of the preliminary sketch for this subdivision. I think the driving narrative there, or part of that discussion was, what would DOT ultimately approve? And one of the initial requirements was that the applicant at least provide documentation as part of that preliminary sketch that they had transmitted the plan to DOT for initial review, which they did provide. We did not receive any review comments because it was late in that process, and then the applicant decided to revise the design. So I don't know what feedback they may have received from the applicant at all. I think staff did wonder what type of movements would be allowed from that intersection, whether DOT would allow full movement, meaning vehicles being able to exit and turn left and right. And we wondered, and ultimately it was up to DOT, we acknowledged, whether or not full movement out of that intersection would have been an ideal condition from a traffic safety standpoint. Whether unprotected, unsignalized movements was a preferred outcome. But again, it was generally a comment to the applicant. Ultimately, we all agreed when we were reviewing this that it was the decision of DOT eventually in terms of how that access would have been limited.
So I guess we wouldn't know unless it's standard operating procedure on their part, that in the proximity of this site is a paper street that's 4th Street on the same side of the road that has platted lots existent on that street.
Yes.
That is the only option for those 6 lots ever, in whatever form they're developed, is going to be to access 158 with full turn permit. I mean, I can't, it's hard for me to imagine that a paper street that's platted would be restricted in the form of the turn.
I don't know that that would be the case. I would have to defer to Mr. Leidy. Roberta, could you bring up the Dare County GIS?
Yeah.
And maybe is a good way to reference that. I don't know. I would highly doubt that. Let me bring it up very quickly. So
While he's getting there, Ben, could you repeat your question?
My question, I guess, is when DOT would be considering whether a drive is permitted on the property north of this point on Coastal Villas, when they were deciding whether that would be a permitted point of access from DOT's point of view, in consideration of traffic safety on 158, would they consider the fact that 4th Street, which is platted, is going to occur with that condition in close proximity anyway?
would staff or DOT?
No, would DOT staff,
Well, I got you.
would DOT staff take into account when they were considering another access, that an access at 4th Street is going to happen at some point?
I don't know. I don't know. All I can tell you is that I don't know, well, maybe I can't tell you this. I don't know whether or not the fact that this paper street exists, whether or not that in and of itself authorizes or entitles this to full movement or not. Because I doubt that was just a platting exercise. I don't know that DOT would have ever reviewed any actual construction plans for that. And I would say, just on its face, if there was an expectation that should have full movements out and in, it would be hugely disruptive to that intersection. So I think that we weren't reviewing that as part of this.
I understand that. And then I have a couple of questions for the attorney. To what extent does this board have the ability to dictate access for a subdivision?
Well, there are access requirements set forth in the ordinance.
Right.
And that is the standard that the applicant must meet.
Okay.
You cannot impose additional access requirements unless it's a condition that is accepted by the applicant.
Okay. So in the way in which they meet it, as long as they meet it, in accordance with the ordinance.
Yes, sir.
And I guess my other, I think my last question for now is, to what extent can the board exercise safety concerns outside of staff recommendations? In other words, can we make in essence, a finding that a condition is safe or unsafe as a board?
It's ultimately up to the board to determine whether the standards of the ordinance have been met. If the board determines that the standards of the ordinance have been met, then it must approve the application as submitted, or it may impose conditions that are acceptable to the applicant.
Okay.
Hope that answers that question.
It does. Thank you very much. All right. Commissioner Brinkley.
Just a question for Commissioner Cahoon. When you were talking earlier about the easements for the drainage and the property owners, there was a thing in here that said infiltration basins 1 and 2, 4 and 15 will be maintained by the HOA. Is that the same thing that you're talking about?
No, I was actually talking about specific lot conditions, but I also have concerns about when they're talking about which lots, which plat are we approving? There's 3, I mean, the numbers don't.
The numbers do not match up.
They do not match up from page 1 to page 2. And then I've got some more questions when it gets to my
Just a
turn.
concern that I would have, the HOA, I've been told from Southridge, is abandoned.
Yeah.
Is what I was told through email, I guess I should say. I'll clarify that. I don't know that to be a fact. But if the HOA is responsible for maintaining coastal villas, and they do the same thing in abandoned, then where does that lie for maintenance of those basins?
That's a good question. So reviewing the records on section 4, and I believe also section 5, there was a determination that there needed to be no property owners association because there was no commonly owned elements. This would be a requirement inherent to the approval of this because there would be commonly owned elements. They would not be able to abandon the association because of the ownership of these commonly owned elements. And likely, in my opinion, I don't believe they would be able to do so without prior action by this board at some time in the future if that ever came up. A couple of maybe points to address. I would say I appreciate we weren't aware of the discrepancy between sheets 1 and 2 and 3, and I would recommend that the record be based, or any action be based on the numbering that's shown on sheets 2 and 3, unless the applicant knows why we shouldn't do that. And then it did occur to me when when many of the neighborhood property residents were speaking that maybe there should be some consideration of the developer being required to deposit seed money for the property owners to ensure that there's appropriate funds available from day one for maintenance of facilities. I've seen that happen in the past, and I think that would be a reasonable request from the board for the applicant to consider an initial deposit of funds in an account available to those homeowners for future maintenance. Mr. Lighty may not like that, but.
I don't have any problem with that.
Good.
I think it's one of the types of financial conditions that can be imposed.
Great.
Nothing else from staff.
Commissioner Powell.
I guess I have a couple of points and a number of questions. And somebody needs to take me back into time, but I remember this property as being zoned residential. So when people refer to it as the original plan being commercial, it was residential, then zoned a mixed use or commercial, and now then it got rezoned residential again. So when people start talking about the original plan, it was residential. That's I guess my first point. And I guess it might be my first point, but it's a question. Am I right?
So the property has always been zoned R2. At a time, not currently, there was a provision that allowed for mixed use development of that site, but that's no longer a permitted use.
It allowed mixed use in R2. It
Correct.
did not change the zoning. It
That's
was
correct.
a use that was added to R2.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Yes,
it's
sir.
always been zoned residential?
Correct.
Okay, so the original plan was residential. Just want to get that straight. The second thing is Mariners Way, the paper street that comes to this new proposed subdivision was approved as part of that plan with the intent of serving this new subdivision. Isn't that correct?
I don't know if that I can speak to intent, but it was established as part of Section 4, and based on a review of the records, there was some expectation that, otherwise why would you have created this, that it would have allowed for ingress and egress to that site. Whether or not there was ever any contemplation that that would have been the only access, I don't know, but at least there was an expectation that the street would have been improved and provided access into this property.
I mean, that's why it was approved that way.
Why else would it?
The next questions, I guess I go, okay, I'm referring to emails and what I heard this morning, so I want to make sure I hear a couple of things. So would like to ask the deputy police chief just one question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Commissioner.
Can you tell me the number of calls the police department has received in the past year from this neighborhood concerning speeding?
Right now, I cannot, but from listening to everything this morning, I've already asked our office manager to start pulling our records from field contacts to see what kind of extra patrols we had in that area. I did go back and look through my emails where I keep all our extra patrols that we send out to the department. Within the last year, I've seen one for a careless and reckless call coming off of a heavy-duty 3/4 ton pickup truck. And the only other one that I saw before that was in July of 2018 for a request of enforcement for stop sign and speed violations on Darien Street.
Okay.
I also started looking at Soundside Road. The office manager is compiling those numbers for us. But just for extra patrols on Soundside Road, the majority of the calls over there are for the parking that we deal with during the summertime when the ocean is not at its best, and people use the park service Soundside access, and they're parking all up along the street. I know personally myself, I have sat over there and ran radar during the summertime, have caught speed violators, but they are compiling those numbers right now.
Now I'll ask the second question. Of the speeders that you caught, what % were tourists and what % were locals?
I can't give you an exact number on that. I will tell you, just when we do other neighborhoods, not specifically this neighborhood, usually the ones that call, they're usually the first ones that we do stop. And other neighborhoods that we have done enforcement on for stop sign violations and speeding as well, but I can't give you a percentage right now. Obviously, in the summertime, it's probably half and half maybe. Off-season, we don't have as many tourists here, so the resident population would go up.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And next question would be to the deputy chief and the fire chief. And that's because of the change in administration, if you will, but, and I'm getting at public safety here, but during technical review, the fire department had every opportunity to talk about providing public safety concerns as it relates to 6 turns and going to the subdivision from Mariners Way. So take me through the technical review as far as how you made the decision that this meets your standard of meeting your standard? And second, do you have any preference that you would like to see outside of your technical review process, if you understand what I'm saying?
I believe I do. When we looked at technical review, and Deputy Chief Hyde does the technical review for our department, so I'm gonna let him speak to that. But for the most part, we look at water supply, ISO, and then access. And there's wants and then there's needs. I would want to have access to places, but I don't have any ordinance that would compel a developer to make me have access to those areas. So, you want to talk about the technical review?
So, Commissioner, what we look at to start with, of course, number one, is we consider whether, and because it can't determine the time it takes you to get there, but we look at several things. The first thing we look at is, number one, is it within 5 miles of the fire station, because that's the ISO requirement to be rated. The next thing is the North Carolina Fire Prevention Code does apply. Certain portions of it apply to a residential subdivision of this nature. The most comprehensive is the access to the buildings, which requires, it's basically a very minimal requirement that we have at least a minimum of a 20-foot wide fire department access road from the front door of the fire station basically to within 150 feet of a structure. One of the other major considerations we look at is water supply and available water. So what's done then, and actually the contractor or the applicant early on requested available fire flows from that area, which were given to them, and then we look at the proposed houses to make sure that the water supply is available. So really, those are the three major things that we can look at code-wise and requirement-wise. Other than that, it does add minutes to the travel time to get there, of course, and certainly. But we don't have anything in black and white legislatively by general statutes or anything of that nature that can tell us or that can require them to make a shorter distance.
So in technical review, it met all your standards. However, you voiced a concern about the opportunity to make it a better situation for public safety by providing an access off the bypass.
If I'm not mistaken, yes, sir, we did say that, of course, yes, it would be a shorter route by the bypass. However, there was nothing that we had that could require that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Is the town engineer here, or do I ask the planning director? May I ask the planning director a couple of questions?
Yes, sir.
Internal traffic flow has to be reviewed by the town engineer as part of tech review. What were the comments by the town engineer based on internal traffic as it relates to this subdivision specifically and in general?
I don't recall any expressed concerns about internal traffic flow within the subdivision. I think he would have been more apt to review internal traffic flow within a self-contained project. I think the assumption is that all of these streets leading to this site, as far as we are aware, are existing public streets that meet town standards. And I don't recall that he had any concerns about that with traffic flow.
Okay, and then I guess the next question I have is for the Public Works Director, which is, yeah, I'll give everybody a chance. Wait till I get to the HR Director. I've heard a lot about swales and maintenance of swales. Has the town taken over the maintenance and operations of drainage within all phases of South Ridge other than this proposed subdivision?
Yes.
And are we doing it as appropriate as we can according to your departmental standards?
We do it, I guess, in this neighborhood, basically, as we do it in every other neighborhood, is that if we see a need to go back and reestablish the swells, then we do that. In this neighborhood, no, we have not done it. Again, this neighborhood has become like
most other neighborhoods. The culverts are required to be put underneath the driveways, and then they get filled back in. And unless that there is a problem, we usually don't go back and dig out and reestablish all the swells again.
So, I guess, what I heard is the proposed subdivision is taking care of 100% of its water, but existing subdivisions are having water issues. And I just want to express that maybe as a concern. Now, all that being said, probably, I'm going to editorialize now, but the main thing I heard today is the proposed subdivision doesn't pass the common sense test, in my opinion. I'm editorializing, but I tell you where I'm going. It makes sense for me that Mariner's Way become an access road, but also makes sense to me that somehow, somebody, either in conjunction with other people or this subdivision, provide some sort of access to 158.
Okay, thank you.
And that's editorializing.
All right.
We grab Ralph one more question?
I'm through, yeah.
Just a quick question, Ralph. Since you know all about all in this town, when this development by this developer was done in this last section, did they actually install the swells to begin with? And where?
Yes, they were. The swells were there. In that section, it was a little bit harder because of the topography of the land, that a lot of it didn't have a back slope to it, because there was no way to put a back slope because the lots were lower. Like, say, take Ridgeview. You could do it on the south side of Ridgeview, but you could do it on the north side of Ridgeview, but on the south side of Ridgeview, you couldn't get a back slope.
Correct.
What's required to be there, the state requirement that the town would have had to be in place before the town accepted the streets in the system, was a 0.65 inch deep swell on a 6-to-1 slope, 12-foot wide. So it's not much.
It's not there.
It's not perceptible.
It's not there.
The only place it's there currently, any swells, is in the new construction that was recently done on Ridgeview.
Because they were made to put that in.
Recently.
Yeah, and again, we'll see how long that stays.
I need to come back to Commissioner Cahoon, because she started with some questions, but I formally skipped her when we were going across the line. I apologize for that.
That's all right. Couple things. Since the elevation is 2 foot higher in this new proposal than the sections behind it, did anybody look at taking the street and probably putting a drain underneath it, a graded part of the street, so that it would keep their stormwater on their property, on that subdivision?
I would have to defer to the design engineer
Okay,
on that
that's
question.
one. And since Commissioner Fuller mentioned common sense, thank you very much. Sometimes I think we forget it sometimes. If anybody can convince me that development of 17 lots with all the lot coverage that's there isn't going to dump more water downstream onto property that's not owned by this subdivision, I'm an idiot. Because I can't perceive 17 lots at full lot coverage not dumping more water downstream than they currently are now as just sand-filled lots. Even with the little stormwater mechanisms they've got in place. And the third thing is, the mayor brought up 4th Street, and you talked about it being an exercise. Actually, paper streets are not an exercise. They were there when the town was developed, and the lots were platted. We platted a lot of paper streets. A lot of them have been withdrawn. A lot of them have not been withdrawn. But I would think the town should be taking a view of the long game, not the short game. We need to be thinking of it long-term about how we progress as a town. And if we're talking about this development, and then the mayor brought up the 6 lots off of 4th Street, why aren't we working as a town to bring people together as property owners to utilize a mechanism where we could have one curb cut off of 158 and this development utilize 4th Street as well? Instead of talking about just a curb cut on 158, work with the people that own the property where 4th Street is still there, and think long-term about what's best for the entire town.
In the existing community.
Yeah, and all the existing communities. I mean, I appreciate the people are coming out this morning and expressing their concerns, but we as a town should be looking at some of these concerns about how we develop subdivisions.
If that's the direction from the board, we're happy to follow up on that.
Mayor, I'm going to be prepared to make a motion.
Before, I don't want, that Fourth Street, that north-south portion is a 40-foot right-of-way. Can a subdivision connect to a 40-foot right-of-way before we?
I mean, the question is, it's an existing right-of-way that hasn't been improved, which is deficient based on our current standards. You know, I think everything is, many things are possible. You know, it would.
Didn't want to go down that road.
It would take widening that section of it to make it compliant. Whether or not that was the end-all be-all, I don't know.
My motion may or may not pass, but I'm going to make a motion to table this item until March. That's a time-specific date, and ask the town to be a facilitator to work with the developer of coastal, whatever this, coastal villas, and the people that own the property around 4th Street to see if we can't come to some sort of accommodation to work together to have one curb cut, one right-of-way. Theoretically, it could be done if you shift everything around, but that's my motion to table.
Could I amend a previous answer to Mr. Commissioner?
First, I need, there's a motion to
Motion
table.
table's not debatable.
Right, and before we do anything else, I need to know whether there's a second to that motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to a motion that is not debatable.
Now, may I ask a clarification
To whom?
to the person that made the motion?
You may.
The clarification is, does your motion include having the developer approval to agree to that right now? I mean,
My motion includes bringing the developer, the people that own the property around 4th Street, that's right to the south of this, and the town work together to see if there's a reasonable solution that can work best for the long-term viability of this area. Does it ask for approval today from the developer? No, because
Okay.
I have no way of knowing that with the motion being made.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Nothing from the attorney? We're not doing anything? Well, no, stop. Don't answer that question. I have a motion and a second that is not debatable, and therefore, you heard the motion, which is to table this issue until the March meeting, and that the town act as a facilitator to get the parties at 4th Street and the developer together to determine whether there is a better solution than what we have on the table.
Correct.
All those in favor?
may I ask clarification of the attorney?
Yes.
Is that a legal motion?
The ordinance, there's two different portions in the ordinance where it discusses the board's potential actions, and in one of those, the earlier portion of the ordinance indicates that the board may take action to approve, deny, approve with conditions, or to table until the board's next regular meeting. So,
So
I don't know that
legally,
precludes you from tabling to another date certain.
So
Particularly since you're-
legally, we can
You can table.
take, okay.
All right, are we ready to vote? All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
So, is the board ready for a short break?
About a lunch break.
Well, yes, I'm sorry, I should have checked. Yes, it's 10 after 12. We actually don't need a short lunch. We don't need a short break, we need a lunch break because we have enough business to do. Is an hour an appropriate amount of time? I think I got some pushback for only a half an hour last time.
Like
So-
people coming in 15 minutes late?
Yeah, so, oh, well, no. So the board, it is 12:11. The board will recess until 1:15. Okay, the board has returned from its lunch break. The next item on our agenda, H3 was withdrawn, so we will consider item H4, a major site plan for the Christmas mouse.
Thanks. Good afternoon. As you said, this is just a major site plan review for the reconstruction of Christmas Mouse following the fire. It is located at 2401 South Croatan Highway. Obviously, retail is a permitted use in the C2. The property is located within a flood zone. They're not proposing to elevate the structure, but rather they're proposing to flood-proof it, which is allowable for commercial structures. As far as the comprehensive plan goes, the property is located in the general commercial district and the general commercial activity node. And we do find that the retail use is consistent with the comp plan policies. For lot coverage, they're allowed 55%, and they're coming in at 54.53%, which is actually a little bit less than what they were at. We'll mention it in parking, but as you'll see from the site plan, which I don't even know if you need to bring it up.
Okay.
But they converted 11 of the parking spaces that were previously asphalt to turf stone. So that was beneficial for lot coverage and for stormwater management. In terms of height, they are utilizing an 812 roof pitch for the structure, so they can go to 42 feet. They're proposed at 35.5. That 812 also helps them out architecturally. With the new UDO, they had to acquire 150 architectural design points. They actually have 152 architectural design points. They have a pretty significant porch area, dormers, as I mentioned, the roof pitch, simulated wood shingles, and some other miscellaneous details. When applying the retail parking standard, this retail structure needed 39 parking spaces, and they have 47 proposed, so they're compliant there. I will use the site plan just to talk about buffering very quickly. The ordinance does require that there's a 5-foot buffer yard C where any parking area abuts a right-of-way. And as you can see here, so this small area here and through here, they've indicated that a buffer will be provided there, but they haven't shown the plantings yet. The 10 by 70 site triangle will come into play here with the type of plantings that we would allow. So they are aware that they do need to put some plantings here, but it will be low-level shrubs that will be coordinated with the planning department at that time. As far as the landscape and buffering that pertains to interior parking lot island landscaping, as well as the preservation of existing or the planting of new vegetation, nothing on this site is changing except the reconstruction of the retail structure and the conversion of these parking spaces. So we felt like it was non-conforming in regard to those areas to begin with. And while they've made some minor improvements, not enough that would trigger them going in and providing interior landscape islands or providing additional landscaping elsewhere on site. No additional lighting has been proposed at this time. Of course, if it is, we'll need the photometrics and to approve the fixture, but at this point, no lighting's proposed. No additional signage. They do have approval from the Dare County Health Department Traffic circulation and stormwater management, that's covered in a separate memo, but that's all been approved by the town engineer. As always, it must comply with the fire prevention code, and the Public Works Director has reviewed and approved the site plan. You'll note this dumpster area was just lined up as a parking space, but they were able to sort of angle that so that it will be accessible to front-load dumpsters now. That said, staff would recommend approval of the major site plan review, and the planning board at their December meeting also recommended approval of the site plan as it's been presented. So can answer any questions, and Brian Sewell with House Engineering is available too.
All right. Board members, you have any questions?
Can you explain flood proofing?
Can I explain floodproofing? I wish we had our chief building inspector here, but there's certain acceptable practices that you can do to around the commercial structure to flood-proof it, essentially. I hate to, I could probably put the mayor on the spot to explain it better than I can.
We've done it on a number of projects. It's permitted on commercial and on historic structures that are below the base flood. On wood frame buildings, you're kind of limited in the height because you do have to resist the water pressure depending on how high the flood elevation is. Generally, it's something like a rubber membrane that bridges across the slab. In some cases, a very simple solution can be a membrane that runs from the slab up the sheeting. The 7-Eleven is flood-proofed here, and they used a brick veneer system to make it waterproof. And then at any door openings that are below, you have to have removable door dams, basically, and generally those are either aluminum. You can buy them on the market. You drop them into slots, tighten them up, and you're required so that no more than 4 inches of water can accumulate in the building over a certain period of time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Renee?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Kevin?
Just out of curiosity, we talked about the parking lot is an existing nonconformity, and the proposal would not increase that nonconformity. Is it nonconforming because of the landscaping interior?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
that's it. Thank you.
Commissioner Gordon? Okay, thank you.
I'm just glad to see the site being redeveloped.
Yes, me too.
A nice-looking building.
Well, I'm glad to see them staying in town. It's a good thing.
Fires are very devastating.
Yep. Any further questions or discussion before a motion? If not, a motion would be in order.
Make a motion to approve this major site plan as presented.
Can I get a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Is any further discussion necessary? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you much. Next item on our agenda is an update from the planning director. Michael. You should have just had a chair behind the podium today.
Really, I can make this very quick. If I provided this for the board's information, I won't go through here unless the board would like me to, but if there's any questions about anything covered in here, and I'm happy to address those.
One thing I'd like the board to consider is, or discuss is, under the updated flood map, updated flood damage prevention ordinance, there's a recommendation in here in February, which would be the February 18th planning board meeting, that the two boards hold a joint workshop to discuss the maps and whatever amendments need to be made, maybe to stormwater fill and runoff management ordinances in conjunction with the adoption of those maps. So that's one thing we'd like the board to consider. And the timing, planning director can speak better than I, but that's just one. It probably needs to take place in February. It doesn't have to take place at that meeting, but since one board was already meeting, we threw that out as a start.
Yeah, if you tracked through that schedule that we have here, I believe you could hold that discussion in March, but that would presumably push everything back a month. and result in us, in this board, not considering the adoption of the map and flood prevention ordinance until your June meeting, which doesn't give you a lot of time before the June 19th effective date. You at least under this schedule have the May meeting and the June meeting to consider that at least. So again, February 18th, what we were hoping to do is, and what we're doing today, what we're doing now, Holly is working on taking the state model flood prevention ordinance and putting it into our UDO format, and making sure that our draft is consistent with the state model, with the local considerations that have been discussed with Dare County and the other municipal officials from the other towns in Dare County. And we'll have a draft by the end of this month that we can circulate to the planning board and the Board of Commissioners, that we can hopefully then convene that meeting on February 18th to have a little bit of a working session to make sure everyone's familiar with everything and where we're going on that. And then based on that feedback, then that would help inform us when we come back to the planning board at the March meeting with that draft for adoption.
Could we also, in addition to a draft ordinance, get with the covering memo, any discussion that you're aware of what the adjacent, what our sister
Yes.
communities are doing in this regard?
I can, yeah, we can
and
definitely
what
do that.
standards they're setting?
Yes.
Board, are you available on February the 18th? At what time is that?
9 a.m.
9 a.m.
I probably won't be, but that's okay. Carry on.
Wait, what, did you say, give me that date again.
February the 18th at 9 a.m.
Planning board meeting.
It's not a problem. Do not change the date for me.
February 18th is a Wednesday, right?
Tuesday.
I'm having a hard time, I'm in March, maybe that's what.
Finger moved too fast for you, Webb?
Excuse me? I jumped 1 month. Okay. I may not be here as well, but I think I will be. The previous day is a holiday, if I'm not mistaken. And
Oh, it is, yes.
I think that's correct.
President's Day.
President's Day.
And usually I'm out of town that weekend, period, 4 or 5 days. But I know I'll be here on the 20th, back by the 20th. But 18th, I'll just.
I'm here.
I get back on the 17th.
Should try the 18th?
Let's
if
try
you're-
it.
If you're here, okay. All right, so yes, then we will put the 18th at 9 a.m. on our calendar, joint workshop with the planning board to discuss the flood ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's probably the only thing that we needed any input on, but again, unless there's anything specific that the board has questions about.
Well, this is a significant undertaking.
Yes.
So to the extent that we can be prepared as far in advance as possible, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, sir.
I'm just questioning if we need a workshop with the planning board. I mean, I'm fine with that, but.
Right.
I guess I'm kind of, and Cliff was explaining, it might be because of, to expedite it, but I thought we were all on pretty much the same page.
Well, I guess there's a certain amount of efficiency in working with the two boards through the questions at the same time, but.
I think there could be some expectation for whatever maybe consensus there would be on local elevation standards and the like. Certainly considerations of what adjoining communities may be doing and whether or not we want to be consistent or more strict than they are. I think that's what we would like some clear direction on, or it would be helpful to have some direction on that point.
Can we get that information? Yeah.
As soon as we have it, yes. I think we're developing a draft. We're going to review it internally with staff. We're going to submit it to the state NFIP coordinator for comment, and hopefully we will have the feedback that we need, that we feel comfortable spinning that out at the end of the month. So end of January, beginning of February, so at least 2 weeks prior to this meeting, you and the planning board should have that draft.
I mean, I'm fine doing it if it's for a reason, but generally, when we meet with the board, it's generally because, we're out of sync or something. I don't see us being out of sync at all.
The out of sync is the development of those maps in general.
But it's no big deal.
Okay, let's proceed with it. I mean, I guess it maybe is the shortest path to get this done, as opposed to seeing something from the planning board, shooting it, having to push it back, and from us if we don't like something. So let's just go ahead and put it on the calendar, and we'll plow through.
I mean, it could be fairly perfunctory. It could, everyone could say, yeah, we completely agree. I think what we want to avoid is the draft that we present to the planning board for the first time, that it's not significantly inconsistent with the expectations of the board, where, the timeline gets even more crunched than it is.
If we do that.
It's a good idea.
Okay, all right. Anything else? Okay, great.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda would be committee reports, and I'll go down the line, see if anybody has a report.
No
for us.
report.
The GovEd committee met in January with a proposed budget that will be coming forward to the towns as part of our budget process and their budget process. We will be having a couple new members. Southern Shores will have a new member for sure. Possibly we'll have one more new member based on attendance and so forth, but other than that, let's move it along.
I do not. The mayor's meeting got moved to today, and I knew I would not be there. So I don't have anything to report from that group. Kevin?
Yes, sir.
You don't? And Webb? Nothing new. All right, thank you. So the next item on our agenda would be consideration of appointments, and we will start with appointment to the Jeanette's Peer Advisory Committee. The board will recall that this is the position that has been held by Commissioner Walters. Most recently, until her retirement, it's necessary that we appoint someone to that position. Cliff, could you very briefly speak to the kind of work that
It's large
group does?
part, it's advocacy. It's information gathering about the progress and changes in rules and revenue and so forth with the Jeanette's Pier. From time to time, we will try and advocate on a position that the state may be taking that would negatively impact us in some way here locally. So it's an opportunity for the executive director just to keep us in the loop and to avoid overreaching decisions that don't take into consideration how it affects us here locally.
Okay.
Meets quarterly, usually less than 2 hours with lunch.
Okay, very good. All right. I have spoken with Commissioner Brinkley, who has indicated a willingness to serve on that committee.
Motion to appoint Commissioner Brinkley.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to appoint Commissioner Brinkley. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your
Look forward to that.
willingness
Thank you.
to do that. The next item on the agenda is consideration of an appointment of the Board of Adjustment Chair and Vice Chair. And you will see that Mr. Cooper is interested in being reappointed chair. Ms. Suppler is interested in being reappointed vice chair. That's not necessarily that the board would take those actions, but any discussion or a motion would be in order.
Mayor, I make a motion to reappoint Jack Cooper as chair and Margaret Suppler as vice chair to the Board of Adjustments.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The next item is consideration of staggered terms for Arts and Culture Committee. You have before you an indicated plan which would stagger those terms so that we had terms ending in the years 2021 and 2022. We would have 1, 2, 3 ending in 2021 and 3 ending in 2022.
I can make, you need a motion?
Yes, please.
Make a motion to approve the staggered terms as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda is consideration of appointments to the Planning Board. You will see that one of the Planning Board members is interested in continuing to serve. That would leave, I believe, 2 positions open.
All 3 open.
I'm sorry, all 3 open.
She didn't want to come back?
Yes, she does. Yeah.
But one's,
Still needs to be reappointed.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. We do need to reappoint.
And have we contacted everybody that's on the list recently to make sure they're all interested?
We did.
Okay. Thank you.
So let's do this one at a time. And so since we're discussing that, and there being no objection, a motion to reappoint Christy Wright to the board would be in order.
So moved.
second.
I have a motion and a second to reappoint Christy Wright to the board. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And then we have 2 open positions, and let's take them one at a time. And a nomination for the first open position would be in order. Yes.
Mayor, I'd like to appoint Molly Harrison to the Planning Board.
Thank you. We have
Second.
a motion and a second to appoint Molly Harrison to the Planning Board. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. And we have one more position to appoint, and the motion would be in order.
I'd like to make a motion that we appoint Gary Ferguson as well.
Okay. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to appoint Gary Ferguson to the board. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Thank you.
Mayor, may I
Yes, sir.
make a comment at this point?
Yes, sir. Of course.
I personally had requested that any information given to me about appointments not include anybody's age or gender. I still am making that request. And I don't care about anybody else, but I don't want to know anybody's age, and I don't want to know anybody's gender. That's from a policy standpoint. I have no clue if there is any potential legal issue with this, but I just don't want to know it. And I thought I expressed that before.
You have. Is there a legal issue with those?
I'm confident there's no legal issue with disclosure of the age of these applicants or candidates. I'm less confident in whether there's any issue with disclosure of the gender of the applicants, but most likely not, because they're volunteers and not employees. But there certainly is nothing wrong with not sharing that information.
Just to deal with this once and for all, I would suggest that there be a motion to strike that information from future presentations to the board at times when we are making appointment decisions.
Are they the only two changes that you're proposing?
I'm not proposing any changes, I'm just saying I don't want to know it.
He's saying he doesn't want to see them, and I'm in agreement that there's some discomfort with whether it's appropriate or not.
And if you'll allow me, I think the whole reason that it was done was to balance those committees with certain age groups and certain gender groups, as well as with certain, although it doesn't say on here, but there was at one point in time an attempt to balance where people lived in the community. And I've always been one of those people that I don't care where they live, as long as they live in Nags Head. I don't care what their age is or their gender is. If they're the best person and most qualified, that's who I want to appoint. So I don't want to know. I'm
Okay.
not saying anybody else, I'm just saying my preference is not to get the information.
I will make that in the form of a motion that age and gender be struck from future charts provided to the board for consideration of appointments.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda are items from the town attorney.
Mr. Mayor, I don't have anything for right now, but we do have a closed session listed under the Board of Commissioners agenda to discuss the Richardson matter, and I would ask that that also include all the pending condemnation actions.
Okay.
When we get to that point.
When we get
the
to that
motion to
point.
include all of those.
Okay, thank you. I would suggest, Commissioner Cahoon, do you have anything other than the request for a closed session under your agenda?
Nothing important, no.
Well, that's okay. It doesn't, well, let's just keep going. What I'm suggesting is that we dispose of all of the items except the closed session items as we go through here. So the next item on our agenda would be items from the town manager, and that's the Dominion Energy Causeway Plan. Cliff?
Yes, sir, thank you. I got a received notice from Winnie Wiseman, Kathleen Wiseman with Dominion Power last month. She supplied an easement that they were wanting the town to sign that would, they have two circuits that are running down the causeway. One line would be buried, the other line would still be overhead, but it would be placed on steel poles instead of wooden poles. In the letter, you see that one of the storms, 23 wooden poles failed, and in the next storm, 18 wooden poles failed. At the time, Dominion is trying to, I think, wanting to get this done sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, when they started looking at the easement area of the causeway, there was quite a few conflicts. On our particular property, it would be the estuarian site on the southeastern part of the causeway. It doesn't really impact us greatly, but there are utilities, there are a lot of other issues, parking lots along the south side, and that's where this easement would run. So I was hopeful that we could get this signed so that this project would commence as soon as possible. I didn't want Nags Head to be the one not to sign the easement because we may only meet once a month. But at this point, they're looking at other alternatives. The plan still is the one pole overhead on steel poles and the other line buried. That's still the plan. They just don't know exactly where it's going to be. So I can either bring this, hopefully an easement back in February. Robert Hobbs took a look at this. He offered an amendment to the easement that would just make clear that where the overhead line, the underground, it doesn't impact the parking lot. Overhead, it may have some impact, so he kind of narrowed that language a little bit specific to our site. So I can bring the easement back in February, or we can sign it with the attorney's approval if it's ready before the February board meeting.
I think we need to move forward.
Agree.
Yes, I agree.
We do not need to hold it up waiting for picky language.
Okay. Do we need to do that in the form of a motion, Cliff, or is direction to you to?
The easement, I think it needs to be in, I'm signing
Okay.
it, conveying property,
You're-
property rights.
Yeah, I think it should be a motion. Yes,
You're
sir.
correct. All right, in that case, a motion would be in order.
I make a motion that we grant consideration of the easement for the manager to sign to Dominion Power to move forward on the Causeway project.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Do we want to make that with the approval of the attorney?
I don't think he's going to, I don't think that's necessary because he's not going to sign it till it's been finalized. They've already been
Okay.
working on that in this particular case.
Okay.
All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is the Board of Commissioners agenda, and Commissioner Cahoon. Besides your request for the personnel matter?
One thing I'd like for the board to consider as we move forward is ask the mayor to possibly meet with the chair of the Board of Education to discuss red light cameras. This morning was just a tip of an iceberg. What I observed over the holiday was just blatant running of the stoplights to the point where people were almost getting hit. And
Happened yesterday.
yeah, it happens all the time. Almost got hit by a policeman myself. But I would like to think that we're not trying to make money off of it.
Right.
We're trying to recoup our cost, and I would say part of any monies that were given to the school board would be better than 0 of 100%.
Right. Well, and this is an issue at a number of intersections.
It is.
On
I observed
158.
I observed them Manio all the way up the beach, but my goal is Nags Head, and if other towns want to jump on and some agreement could be made with the Board of Education, I think that would be great, and then take that forward to the legislature.
When it was discussed before, was it we could not work out the logistics with the school board? Was that?
Well, I can comment on this. This did come up a couple of years ago. The problem is that the proceeds from any of these violations must be paid, after their process, must be paid to the Board of Education, and there's no provision that allows the town to get reimbursed for its costs in installing the cameras. And I've had some discussions with the school board attorney, Brian Shaw, about this, and there was a pilot program that was adopted in like Alamance County or one of those places out west, that, and this is a few years ago, and to my knowledge, it's never taken hold to expand the way that these can be funded, or at least that the cost can be recouped by a local government unit. But I think the bottom line is that if the town is not concerned about the cost and is concerned about only the safety aspects and doesn't mind the Board of Education being the recipient and beneficiary of any funds that flow from this, it can be done. Beyond that, it's going to be tricky.
My point is, I'd like the town be able to recoup its cost, because it's really expensive to start out with, and then it goes down. But I would suggest that you take a look at the city of Greenville. I think they adopted something in the last couple of years that did that too. But
They may have been in that pilot program. It may be the kind of thing that with local legislation you could get done, you know,
yeah,
but.
that's what Greenville had done. They had local
That's-
legislation. That was my point about trying to see if we could look at something. If we had some sort of buy-in.
Certainly.
That's all I have.
Be happy to do that.
Thank you.
And your request for closed session, we will roll together with a single motion at the end of this.
Whenever you're ready for that.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is...
Can I ask all the board members?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm just asking.
I'm good.
What is your thought about about the red light cameras?
No. I mean, under Board of Commissioner agenda, are you going to ask all of us?
Yes. No, I'm sorry, Mike, you're good. I'm sorry. Kevin?
I just, I attended the Essentials of Municipal Government at the Kitty Hawk Hilton on December the 14th. It was a Saturday. It's a class for newly elected officials. I was lucky enough to have the class, get to take the class here in Kitty Hawk, but it was very informative. Even someone coming from local government, I enjoyed what I got out of the class. Also, I know on social media, and I talked to Roberto about this earlier, that there's a way to sign up to get notifications when there's a change in the town hall schedule hours, or the hours that were open, holiday, and also the sanitation schedule. I was also wondering, and she confirmed, in that same alert center, you can get notifications when there's a new agenda posted for the planning department or planning board, and also for the Board of Commissioners. And I just think it's important for the citizens to know that you can find out. You know, I've heard people say, well, I don't even know when the meetings are. Well, you can get an alert when there's a new agenda posted.
Yes.
And it's a way for them to keep up, or at least they can review it just to see if there's anything on there. So I would just like, whatever we could do to encourage people to sign up for those alerts.
May I add to that?
Yes.
Wouldn't it be easy, like for instance with the garbage schedule changed at Christmas, those people that subscribe to the town, couldn't we just send out an email blast to all those people, like the day before or 3 days before, that just be reminded that your garbage isn't gonna be picked up on Monday? I mean, we could take an initiative. We don't have to wait for people to go to our site to find it. We could just can we send an email blast? Is the first question.
Yes.
Yes.
And then why don't we send an email blast?
Yes, I think that.
Is the next question.
Yes.
We did the week after Christmas, I guess, or Christmas, we changed on the west side from that week from Tuesday to a Monday. Everything after that was almost blasted every day.
All right. And in my neighborhood, one person put their garbage can out on Monday, and everybody else put it out on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, I can guarantee you, people that got the email still put it out. I mean, it's.
Well, the email came out
Right.
after
Right.
Monday.
But, yeah.
What are the?
I think what you're saying is good, and we can go further.
Tax bills go out in December sometime?
They go out in September.
August.
August for payment in
Or
September.
September. They go out in August, due in September.
Right,
Okay.
and then they go out again.
One of the things I have concern about is, we push out a lot of information through social media and email. You still have people who, aren't necessarily active in those areas of email. And I wonder if at least once a year, we couldn't use our paper document that we do mail to everybody, to every household, to say, to include a reminder that the town offers a lot of information by email and social media, and you should sign up for it. I mean, I'm concerned about using only the electronic media to encourage people to sign up for electronic media, because if they haven't done it already, it's just, some people are still old school, and they want to see they won't do it unless they see a piece of paper.
And some people are concerned about privacy, because whoever signs up for it, that becomes public information.
Yeah. So maybe that's just another channel that we can remind people that.
People have to want to be reached in order to be reached.
Yeah, that a lot of information is available. Thank you. Anything else, Webb?
I do have one thing. It may sound minor, but things like this are important to me, and that was right with our audit presentation. We were given, I think, was it a 44-page document or something like that in our package? And just on page 2, if you look at page 2, under quick facts, there are factual errors included on the very first page other than the cover. And, if you go through there and you see what you consider maybe minor, but you see factual errors right there, then it leads you to believe that there are other areas of concern about stuff you may not know about. And I think any information we should put out should contain factual information and not obvious factual errors. And if you want me to give you an example, I can.
Please do. Yes, I do.
under the principal employers in Nags Head, just as a gross example, one of the principal employers in Nags Head is Harris Teeter. I don't know how many employees Harris Teeter has in Nags Head, but I don't think it's very many, and I don't think it deserves a top 10 listing. There's no Harris Teeter in Nags Head. And it goes on further, you know, I could go through a number of these if you wanted me to, which would include, like, the county of Dare. I doubt they're a top 10 employer in the county.
In the town?
In the town.
Right.
Department of Transportation, I doubt they're in the top 10. And I could keep going on.
Yeah,
But,
I
so,
wonder-
so there are factual errors that are just presented that, you know, I think we should pay more attention to detail.
Well, and I wondered, what is the basis for that list?
Well, this is the excuse. This isn't to justify. I mean, Commissioner Fuller's right. Harris Teeter shouldn't be on a list of top 10 employers in town of Nags Head when they don't have a presence. That information is required as part of the GFOA that goes into the audit. The website that you go to kind of cut and paste this information doesn't narrow down to Nags Head. What it does is takes a glimpse of a more regional. What we should have done was taken that top 10 list, taken the obvious errors off of that top 10 list and just moved the next one up. That's how we plan to remedy that moving forward. Now, and only put those that have a presence in Nags Head.
Thank you. Any other items under commissioners' agendas? Under the mayor's agenda, I will point you to the retreat agenda, which the heading suggests that I compiled this, but I believe this has been a contribution from folks who had different topics, and some of which are left over from our previous retreat. And I suspect, while it doesn't look like a lot of items, I am guessing that our pavement condition and drainage infrastructure discussion is going to take some time, that the residential stormwater ordinance is going to take some time, and that the beach nourishment municipal service districts may take some time. So if we want to add any additional items, I'd ask we give careful consideration to them.
I'm comfortable with this list, but that's me.
Okay.
You've got my big ones on there, so.
Okay. Anything, Mike? Good? Webb?
The only thing I would say is, based on the information the manager presented, is one thing, recycling's gonna take a long time too.
Yes, it could very well. Yes, you're right. Okay, then the agenda's set. That brings us to another closed session. So I think it's time for us to roll all of our closed sessions into one item, which I believe that we are dealing with personnel, attorney-client privilege, closed session minutes.
I believe that encompasses them all.
You ready for a motion?
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we go into closed session to consider a personnel matter, the Richardson Beach Nourishment Project easement condemnation, as well as all the other condemnation cases, along with disposal of closed session minutes according to General Statutes 143-318.11A and A3, A6 and A3, and as, I think,
M1.
and 1.
There you go.
Okay, thank you very much for putting that motion together. I appreciate that. Do I have I have a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The board will be in closed session. Okay, the board has returned to open session. I'll ask Mr. Leidy to report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The board did take action to approve closed session minutes from the last 6 months and to open certain ones and seal others. The board also gave some instructions to the town's attorneys regarding the pending litigation. Beyond that, no other actions were taken.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there any other business to come before the board before we adjourn? Hearing none, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
Do we recess to our?
I'm sorry, thank you. I do
I'm
this
sorry, I
all the, no, no,
apologize.
do not apologize. I do this all the time. A motion to recess to our Board of Commissioners retreat on January 23rd at 9 a.m. would be in order.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Is that a place to be determined?
That is at the Villas Clubhouse at Villa Dunes Drive.
You can walk.
Walk there.
I can walk there.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Board is adjourned.